They say the desert never forgets. Beneath the endless skies of the American frontier lie stories whispered by the wind, stories that defy logic, history, and even time itself. A ghost rider seen galloping through a canyon where no man has tread for decades. A prospector's gold stash buried deep in a mountain that now refuses to be found. A town that vanished overnight, leaving meals half-eaten and fires still burning. The Wild West is known for its legends, outlaws, lawmen, and pioneers. But beyond the tales we've come to romanticize, there exists a darker layer, a shadowed realm of strange disappearances, unsolved crimes, and phenomena that no bullet or badge could explain. What really happened in the sun-scorched ghost towns of Arizona? Why do some believe a cursed treasure still claims lives to this day? And what secrets still echo from the walls of forgotten saloons and blood-stained trails? These are not stories of fantasy. They are documented mysteries, grounded in the dust and bones of history. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the strange, the chilling, and the unsolved, as we uncover Wild West mysteries that cannot be explained. A mystery carved into the stone of the New Mexico desert. Beneath the blazing sun of southern New Mexico, the vast expanse of white sands shimmers like a dream half-remembered. Here, amidst the dry wind and endless gypsum dunes, lies a formation known as Victorio Peak, an unassuming mound of rock and desert scrub rising from the Jornada del Muerto basin. Isolated and silent, the peak gives little indication of the secrets it may hold, and yet, beneath its rugged facade, some believe unimaginable treasure and a centuries-old curse await discovery. The legend begins in 1937, when a man named Milton Ernest Doc Noss claimed to have stumbled upon a hidden chamber within the peak. Doc was a jack of all trades, a showman, a bootlegger, a part-time prospector with a flair for storytelling. But what he described was no ordinary find. Deep within a concealed shaft, Noss claimed to have discovered a cavern filled with stacked gold bars. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, along with jewels, Spanish armor, ancient swords, and even human remains. At first, few took his account seriously, but Doc was persuasive, and he returned from the mountain with items that suggested at least some truth to his story. Gold bars, unlike anything issued by the U.S. Mint. Artifacts of undetermined age and origin. Enough evidence to stir curiosity and greed. Then came the questions. Where had the gold come from? Why was it buried in such an obscure, inhospitable place? And why, shortly after announcing his discovery, did Doc Noss end up dead, shot by a friend and associate under murky circumstances, just as plans to excavate the treasure were underway? Some point to the Spanish Empire as the origin of the hoard. In the 17th century, conquistadors and missionaries swept across the region, exploiting native labor to extract silver and gold. Was Victorio Peak a hidden depot for loot en route to Spain? Or perhaps a secret stash left behind during one of the many failed expeditions into the Southwest? Others suggest the gold might have more modern roots. During the early 20th century, amidst the chaos of the Mexican Revolution and global conflicts, it's theorized that individuals or even governments hid large reserves of gold for safekeeping. Was Victorio Peak part of a covert military cache or the burial ground of stolen fortunes? Some even speculate ties to Nazi gold shipments or Federal Reserve misplacements, claims largely unsupported, yet persistently echoed in fringe accounts. Then there's the question of access. After Doc Noss's death, the area was subsumed into the White Sands Missile Range, one of the most secretive military installations in the United States. Civilian access became restricted. Those who tried to re-enter the peak, most notably Doc's widow, Ova Noss, were met with red tape, armed guards, and, allegedly, surveillance. Did the military stumble upon the treasure during weapons testing or tunnel surveys? Or did they perhaps already know it was there? In 1961, a secretive excavation was permitted within the peak, led by a U.S. Army team. Documents confirm this effort, though its findings remain classified. Witnesses later claimed that trucks were seen leaving the area at night, trucks, they said, that appeared heavily laden. No official explanation was ever given, but for all the speculation, no definitive proof of the gold has ever emerged. Skeptics argue that Doc Noss may have fabricated or exaggerated his discovery, using fool's gold or planted artifacts to bolster his tale. Perhaps the cavern he claimed to find was misremembered or collapsed. Or maybe, in the brutal heat and isolation of the desert, fantasy overtook fact. And yet, too many details remain difficult to dismiss. Multiple individuals, including military personnel, have gone on record saying they saw tunnels, gold bars, or entrances sealed with concrete. Some describe sudden changes in military behavior after exploration attempts. Others note unexplained geological surveys in the area that align with Doc Noss's original maps. Could all of this stem from a mere misunderstanding, or was something deliberately hidden? More fringe theories suggest that the peak itself may be more than just a hiding place. Some believe it is built upon a pre-Columbian sacred site, possibly used by native tribes for burial or spiritual rites. Others point to the alignment of surrounding landmarks and ancient petroglyphs, wondering if there's a deeper connection to indigenous legends, stories of mountains that consume men, or of spirits that guard sacred treasure, punishing those who come too close. The curse, if there is one, is not overt, but the pattern is chilling. Death, misfortune, and secrecy seem to follow those who pursue the gold. Doc Noss was killed. His wife's repeated legal battles were met with stonewalling. Explorers have suffered accidents, breakdowns, or sudden reversals of fortune. In one case, a man who claimed to have seen the treasure firsthand vanished without a trace before he could provide documentation. Is it all coincidence? Or is there, hidden within the rock and silence of Victorio Peak, something that resists discovery, something meant to remain buried? Today, the mountain stands undisturbed, watched by military eyes and the unforgiving desert sun. No new excavations are allowed, no independent surveys permitted. The air around it is still and strange, as if holding its breath. What lies beneath Victorio Peak? Gold? Bones? Or just the echo of a tall tale too compelling to die? Perhaps we'll never know. Or perhaps the truth is waiting, silent, sealed in stone, just beneath our feet. A legend adrift far from the sea, trapped in the shifting sands of time. In the heart of the California desert, where the sun scorches the earth and the horizon quivers with heat, lies an expanse so dry, so desolate, that it seems impossible anything could have ever lived there, let alone sailed through it. This is the Colorado Desert, an arid lowland within the larger Sonoran Desert, marked by dust-choked ravines, cracked lake beds, and endless salt flats. It is here, among the creosote bushes and weather-worn boulders, that whispers persist of something wildly out of place. A ship. A Spanish galleon, marooned not on any coastline, but stranded hundreds of miles inland, buried beneath centuries of sand. Locals call it the lost ship of the desert. For over 150 years, stories have emerged of travelers glimpsing the skeletal remains of a large wooden vessel partially submerged in the dunes, sails torn by time, its hull jutting from the earth like the fossil of some prehistoric leviathan. Some say it was filled with treasure. Others that it was cursed from the start. But all agree on one thing: the ship doesn't belong there. The earliest written accounts of the lost ship appear in the mid-19th century, often tied to reports of wagon trains passing through the desert. Prospectors, ranchers, and pioneers described coming across unusual timbers, odd carvings, and, on rare occasion, what looked like a decaying ship's mast poking from the sand after a seasonal flood. The tale was passed along in mining camps and saloons, changing slightly with each telling. Some placed it near the Salton Sink, others farther south in the Borrego Badlands. No one could agree on its precise location, yet the story endured. To understand how a galleon could end up in a desert, we must look to history. In the 16th and 17th centuries, Spanish explorers ventured along the western coasts of the Americas, establishing trade routes, ports, and missions. Some sailed up the Gulf of California, hoping to discover the legendary Strait of Anian, a mythical waterway believed to connect the Pacific to the Atlantic. These expeditions often ventured into uncharted territory, where maps were vague and coastlines misleading. Could one such ship have veered too far into an inland sea that no longer exists? Herein lies a crucial clue: the ancient lake known as Lake Cahuilla. Once a massive freshwater lake, Lake Cahuilla filled the Salton Basin multiple times over the past 2,000 years, fed by periodic shifts in the course of the Colorado River. At its peak, it stretched over 100 miles long and 30 miles wide, large enough, perhaps, for seafaring vessels to navigate. Some believe that a Spanish galleon could have entered the lake system during a flood surge, becoming trapped as waters receded and the shoreline dried up. It sounds improbable, but not impossible. Historical records indicate that early Spanish explorers did, in fact, send shallow draft ships upriver from the Gulf. And if one of these vessels lost its way, drifting into the vast temporary inland sea, could it have been stranded as the waters withdrew, leaving it high and dry in the shifting desert? Skeptics argue that such an event would require perfect timing and extraordinary navigational error. Yet no other explanation seems to account for the consistency of the sightings. In the late 1800s, a man named Charlie Klusker claimed to have found the ship near the Salton Sink. He even launched an expedition to retrieve it, but the location eluded him on his return. He was not the last. Throughout the 20th century, new sightings surfaced, often after floods or earthquakes reshaped the desert floor. In 1933, a man named Jack Wagner reportedly discovered a ship with ornate carvings and pearl inlays, claiming it was like something from a museum. He took photos, but they were lost in a house fire before they could be published. Over time, the mystery only deepened. Some accounts describe a ship with Viking-like features, suggesting Norse explorers, or perhaps a Chinese junk, adding an entirely different historical dimension. But most stick to the image of a classic Spanish galleon, broad, square-rigged, and imposing. And then there are those who speak of gold. Treasure hunters have long been drawn to the region, lured by rumors that the ship once carried Aztec riches bound for Spain. According to one version of the legend, the crew, stranded and dying of thirst, buried the treasure beneath the ship before succumbing to the harsh elements. It was never seen again. Fringe theories abound. Some posit that the ship is a mirage, a psychological projection born of thirst and heat stroke. Others believe the entire story is a fabrication, an elaborate hoax born from gold fever and frontier myth-making. But the sheer volume of accounts, spread across decades and from people with no apparent connection, makes that explanation difficult to accept in full. Satellite imagery has been used in recent years to scan the desert floor, but no conclusive structure has been located. Still, researchers admit that the sand shifts constantly, often covering and uncovering objects in a matter of weeks. In an environment so unstable, is it possible that the ship exists, only visible for fleeting moments before disappearing again? Perhaps the most enduring aspect of the tale is not the ship itself, but what it represents. A breach in the boundary between history and legend, where the improbable still has room to breathe. In a world increasingly mapped and measured, the lost ship of the desert reminds us that some secrets may still be buried, not in deep oceans or distant jungles, but in the very soil beneath our feet. So we are left to wonder, did a ship once sail where the dunes now drift? Or is the desert simply playing tricks on the imagination, casting shadows from a time long gone? The answer, for now, lies just beneath the surface, waiting. A mystery carved in stone and bone. The Grand Canyon, vast, majestic, timeless. It stretches across the northern Arizona desert like a colossal wound in the earth, carved by the Colorado River over millions of years. From its rim, the land seems to fall away into infinity. Towering red cliffs catch the dying light like ancient monuments, and shadows slip between craggy plateaus and hidden alcoves, whispering secrets older than memory. It is here, in this labyrinth of stone and silence, that one of the strangest and least understood tales of the American West begins. A story of exploration, of death, and of skeletal remains unlike any ever catalogued by official history. According to several accounts dating back to the early 20th century, skeletons, human skeletons, were discovered deep within the canyon's most remote caves. But these were not ordinary remains. Some were described as unusually tall, others disfigured or distorted in inexplicable ways. And most curious of all, they were said to be laced with gold. The legend first gained traction in the 1930s, but its roots may reach even further. Some tie it to earlier rumors whispered by Colorado River runners and early explorers who found evidence of habitation where none should have existed. Tunnels carved high into sheer rock walls, stone steps worn smooth by use, and ancient fires blackening cave ceilings. But the skeletons, it is said, were found much later, and their discovery was never officially recorded by the National Park Service. Those who claim to have seen them describe bones threaded with gold, veins of the metal seemingly fused within the marrow, almost as if the bodies had absorbed it in life. A process unknown to science, or perhaps an effect of extreme geological pressure over eons. Others tell of burial chambers containing ceremonial objects, gold headdresses, and unusual tools made of materials not native to the region. The most frequently cited discovery came from a supposed expedition led by a man named G.E. Kincaid, an explorer affiliated, some say, with the Smithsonian Institution. In a controversial article published in the Arizona Gazette in 1909, Kincaid claimed to have found a cave system in the eastern Grand Canyon containing artifacts of apparent Egyptian or Tibetan origin, hieroglyphs, copper tools, even a statue resembling the Buddha. The skeletons, according to this narrative, were arranged in burial poses, some wrapped in unknown materials, and some infused, again, with gold. But almost immediately, the story fades into obscurity. The Smithsonian denied involvement. No official expedition records were ever produced. The article itself stands alone, a single point of light in an otherwise darkened trail. Was it a hoax, a misreporting, or something deliberately hidden? Skeptics have been quick to dismiss the tale as early 20th century sensationalism, a product of the era's obsession with lost civilizations and exotic mysteries. Yet over the years, hikers, river guides, and amateur archaeologists have come forward with their own strange findings. Unusual carvings, ruins in inaccessible crevices, and once in a great while, bones. Some suggest that what was found may not have been Egyptian at all, but rather evidence of an advanced indigenous culture long forgotten. Could the ancestral Puebloans or a pre-Hopi civilization have achieved a level of sophistication we have yet to understand? The Grand Canyon was home to numerous tribes, each with oral histories that speak of sky people, underworld journeys, and sacred beings who came from far away. More speculative voices propose that the gold-laced bones represent an entirely unknown species or subspecies, beings not from a lost civilization, but from an earlier epoch. Perhaps even visitors from beyond. There are those who point to Hopi legends of the Ant People, tall, pale, underground dwellers who aided humanity during times of cataclysm. Could these tales be more than allegory? Geologists note that gold does occur naturally in some rock strata of the canyon, and it's possible that ancient miners once sought it out, their bones becoming part of the landscape over millennia. But gold becoming part of the bones themselves? That remains unexplained. What lends the story its enduring power is the canyon itself. With over 1,000 caves documented, many more unexplored, it's not unreasonable to think that discoveries await within its shadowed corridors. The Grand Canyon resists complete understanding. Its scale dwarfs our certainty. Its silence conceals as much as it reveals. In recent years, restrictions on exploration have increased. Many of the supposed discovery sites lie within protected zones, off-limits to the public. Researchers seeking to follow the trail left by Kincaid or others often find themselves stopped not by danger or distance, but by red tape. The official line remains unchanged. No such artifacts, no such skeletons, no such caves exist, and yet the rumors persist. Could there really be a hidden burial complex buried deep within the canyon walls, shielded by time and stone? Were the gold-laced skeletons evidence of a forgotten people, an ancient rite, or something far stranger? Or was it all a clever fabrication, meant to dazzle an eager public and draw attention to a remote and awe-inspiring landscape? The Grand Canyon holds its secrets tightly, and perhaps, just perhaps, one of them still lies in wait, wrapped in gold and shadow, far from the river's roar, in a place where only the wind remembers. What else lies buried in those unreachable heights? And if the truth were found today, would we even be allowed to see it? Where shadows ride with the wind, and time itself seems to falter. Just east of Phoenix, Arizona, the land begins to rise, shifting from desert plains into jagged ridges of volcanic rock, painted in hues of rust and ochre. This is the Superstition Mountains, a stark and brooding landscape forged by ancient lava flows and carved by centuries of wind and silence. The peaks cut sharply into the sky like the spines of some sleeping creature. They are beautiful, and they are feared. Long before European settlers arrived, the Apaches spoke of this place with reverence and warning. They called it Thunder God's Land, a domain watched over by powerful spirits. And even now, in the 21st century, the superstitions remain wrapped in mystery. Hikers vanish, maps fail. And when the sun dips low and the wind picks up through the dry canyons, some say you can hear hooves, ghostly, deliberate, echoing across the rocks. They call him the Phantom Rider. Sightings stretch back more than a century. The earliest documented report appears in a dusty territorial newspaper from the late 1800s. A group of prospectors returning from a fruitless expedition swore they saw a lone rider trailing them from a high ridge. At first, they assumed it was another miner, until the figure disappeared into a narrow ravine with no apparent exit. When they investigated, there were no tracks, no sign of a horse, no man. Others have described a similar figure. Tall, draped in dark clothes, mounted on a black horse with glowing eyes. He is said to appear at dusk or during sudden storms, always at a distance, never speaking. Gunslingers, treasure hunters, ranchers, Even park rangers have all claimed to see him. Sometimes on trails that lead nowhere, other times at the edge of dangerous cliffs. Then, just as suddenly as he appears, he vanishes. Could this be a case of mistaken identity? An optical illusion cast by the craggy horizon and refracted desert heat? That's the rational theory. But the more you look, the harder it is to explain away. Some believe the Phantom Rider is the ghost of a Spanish soldier, one of the early explorers who came north in the 16th and 17th centuries in search of gold and conquest. The Superstition Mountains were rumored to hide part of the fabled 7 cities of Cibola, golden cities described in early legends of the New World. Expeditions came and went, many never returning. Perhaps some suggest this rider was left behind, or cursed to guard what he found. Others tie the figure to the legend of the Lost Dutchman's Mine, the most famous and elusive treasure in the American West. Jacob Waltz, the so-called Dutchman, is said to have discovered an immense gold deposit hidden deep within the Superstitions in the 1800s. He died without revealing its location. Since then, hundreds have searched for it. Many never came back. Could the Phantom Rider be one of them? A soul still bound to the gold he could never claim? Then there are tales more deeply rooted in native tradition. According to some Apache accounts, the mountains are sacred, home to spirit beings who protect their secrets. One belief speaks of a guardian, a spirit sentinel who appears in human form to ward off intruders. Could the Phantom Rider be such a being, less ghost, more entity? Skeptics point to atmospheric phenomena and the psychological effects of extreme isolation. The Superstition. Mountains are remote, rugged, and often punishing. Heat stroke, exhaustion, and fear can create powerful hallucinations. And yet, the consistency of the sightings, the calm conviction of those who report them, and the refusal of the legend to fade into folklore suggest there may be more at play. In 1932, a photographer named Ellis Monroe claimed to have captured a blurred silhouette on the crest of Miner's Needle, a formation deep within the range. The image, long dismissed as inconclusive, shows what could be a mounted figure, though no details are clear. Monroe insisted the rider had been watching him for over an hour before simply melting into the stone. More recently, in the early 2000s, a pair of experienced hikers, military veterans with extensive backcountry survival experience, reported an encounter that left them visibly shaken. They described following a rider who seemed to glide across rough terrain without leaving prints. When they called out, there was no response. When they attempted to close the distance, the figure turned, raised a hand, and vanished in a blink. Their photos revealed nothing, but their accounts were identical, given separately, and neither man has spoken publicly since. Is it all legend? A trick of the mind shaped by centuries of campfire stories? Or is there something in the Superstition Mountains that resists explanation? Something that watches, rides, and protects whatever lies buried beneath? No one has ever caught the rider. No bones or artifacts have been found. But the stories continue. And those who venture deep into the mountains often report the same strange feeling, as if they are not alone. Maybe the Phantom Rider is just that, a phantom. A projection of fear, gold fever, and wilderness anxiety. Or maybe, just maybe, he is something else entirely. A remnant of the past. A guardian of a forgotten truth. A warning not to dig too deeply into what was never meant to be uncovered. Because in the Superstition Mountains, not all trails lead back. And when the last light fades and the wind begins to howl between the rocks, you might want to look behind you, just to be sure. An outlaw's final secret, buried beneath the pines of Colorado. High in the rugged heart of the Rocky Mountains, where the jagged peaks catch the early morning mist and the scent of pine rides the wind, a mystery nearly 2 centuries old lingers like a whisper through the trees. The land here is steep, remote, and wild, crisscrossed by narrow canyons, hidden ravines, and the quiet flow of icy creeks. It was, and still is, a place where things can be hidden and forgotten. Somewhere in this vast expanse of wilderness, it is said that a cache of stolen gold lies buried, a treasure taken not from a legend or a ghost tale, but from an actual band of outlaws who rode and bled during the chaos of the American Civil War. They were known as the Reynolds Gang. The year was 1864. Colorado had only recently been carved out as a territory, and its goldfields were fueling both Union dreams and Confederate ambitions. It was a time of uncertainty, when the line between soldier and outlaw was often blurred, and loyalty to a cause could mask deeper motives. The Reynolds Gang was led by brothers Jim and John Reynolds, Confederate sympathizers, or, according to some, Confederate operatives, who gathered a group of men with a mission: disrupt Union gold shipments moving north from Colorado into Kansas and beyond. Gold, after all, was the fuel of war, and whoever controlled it controlled the fight. The gang was active in South Park, a high-altitude basin surrounded by towering mountains, roughly 100 miles southwest of Denver. Operating from secret camps in the dense forests near Kenosha Pass and along the old Fairplay to Denver Trail, they ambushed stagecoaches, waylaid shipments, and gathered a small but substantial haul of gold. But their success was short-lived. In July of that same year, the group was ambushed by a hastily assembled posse of Union loyalists and local militia. Accounts differ on how it happened. Some say a tip-off betrayed them, others claim an accidental encounter. What's known is that the Reynolds Gang was forced to scatter across the mountains. Some were captured, others shot. A few vanished into the wilderness. But before they fled, legend holds that they buried their gold. The story goes that Jim Reynolds, realizing they wouldn't escape with their loot, ordered the gold hidden in a remote canyon or gulch somewhere in the South Park region, possibly near the headwaters of Geneva Creek, or deeper into what is now known as the Lost Creek Wilderness. Only he and 1 or 2 others knew the exact location, but Jim Reynolds was soon killed in a gunfight. The secret, it seemed, died with him, and the gold, it was never found. In the years that followed, rumors grew. Some said the gold was buried under a large pine marked with carvings. Others claimed it was in an old mine shaft, sealed with dynamite. A few even believed it had been melted down and stashed in river rocks or disguised as common iron bars. Treasure hunters began to arrive by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Many claimed to have found clues: pieces of rusted tack, bullets, scraps of maps. But the treasure itself remained elusive. The surrounding terrain did little to help. The region is a patchwork of shifting geography. Landslides, avalanches, and spring thaws can alter the landscape dramatically. A canyon present in 1864 might be unrecognizable now. Streams reroute, trees fall, markers vanish. Was the gold buried in a place that no longer exists? Skeptics have questioned whether the treasure ever existed at all. Some suggest that the gang was never as successful as the legends claim, that the gold was merely a few small bags of dust, not the hoard often imagined in retellings. Others argue that surviving gang members returned years later and retrieved it in secret, but new discoveries occasionally reignite hope. In the 1950s, a prospector named Clyde Clayson claimed to find carved stones along Geneva Creek, symbols he believed matched Civil War-era codes. In the 1980s, metal detectorists found a rusted revolver and several coins near Kenosha Pass, prompting speculation that the gang had camped there. More recently, satellite imaging and LiDAR scans have revealed unnatural depressions and grid-like soil anomalies deep in wilderness zones, potential dig sites, or perhaps nothing at all. Of course, some theories push further. Was the gold even meant for the Confederacy? Or was that a convenient cover for simple outlaw greed? Some researchers suggest the Reynolds gang may have been little more than common bandits, using political affiliation as an excuse to rob and kill. If so, the gold was theirs alone, never meant for generals or governments. Others lean into the mystical. There are whispered accounts of a curse surrounding the Reynolds gold, that those who seek it fall to misfortune, madness, or worse. Over the decades, a pattern of missing hikers, fatal accidents, and unexplained injuries has been loosely tied to expeditions in search of the treasure. Mere coincidence, or something more? Even the name Lost Creek Wilderness seems to carry a quiet weight, as if nature itself has conspired to keep the gold hidden. Roads end abruptly, trails fade into brush, and deep in the canyons the silence becomes unnerving. What became of the Reynolds gang's gold? Was it truly buried beneath the mountain pines, just waiting to be found? Or has it already been recovered, its story left behind only as a lure for dreamers and drifters? The forest keeps its secrets well, and the gold, if it ever existed, may still lie beneath centuries of roots and stone, waiting for someone with the right map or the right moment to uncover it. But until then, the mountains remain silent, and the legend lives on. A trail of gold that vanishes into the mountains. High in the San Juan Mountains of southwestern Colorado, the peaks rise like ancient cathedrals, wrapped in snow even as summer warms the valleys below. The wind moves gently through alpine meadows, brushing past fields of wildflowers and the remnants of long-abandoned mining camps. Here, amidst the fractured cliffs and narrow passes, lies one of the West's most enduring enigmas, a legend older than Colorado itself, the lost Josephine mine. Its name is whispered with reverence by treasure hunters, historians, and prospectors alike. For more than a century, people have sought this mysterious mine, said to hold vast deposits of gold that could change the fate of anyone who found it. And yet, despite generations of searching, its location remains unknown. The story of the lost Josephine begins in the early 1800s, long before the Colorado Gold Rush. According to most versions of the tale, the mine was originally discovered by Spanish explorers, possibly in the 1700s, sent north from Mexico in search of precious metals. One such expedition, either sanctioned by the Spanish crown or operating independently, is believed to have made its way into what is now the San Juan Range, guided by native trails and rumors of rich mineral veins. There, deep in a canyon or nestled against a cliff face, they found it, a mine so rich in gold that it was named La Mina de Santa Josefina, the mine of St. Josephine. Some accounts suggest the gold was so pure it needed little refining. Others describe entire veins of exposed ore, glittering beneath thin layers of stone. But whatever they found, the expedition was never heard from again. Some say they were killed by hostile tribes. Others suggest they were buried by an avalanche. One theory claims the men died trying to transport the gold back across the mountains, their bodies lost to time. A few believe they sealed the mine intentionally, its entrance disguised to prevent outsiders from finding it. All that remained were fragments of maps, cryptic journal entries, and the growing whisper of a hidden fortune in the Colorado wilderness. More than half a century later, the tale was rekindled. In the 1860s and 70s, as mining towns sprang up across Colorado, old Spanish records were uncovered. Some real, some suspected forgeries, mentioning a mine dedicated to Santa Josefina. Prospectors claimed to find traces of Spanish tools, rusted helmets, and carved stone markers pointing toward high, inaccessible ravines. A few swore they stumbled across sealed entrances or shafts choked with rubble, but never gold, never the mine itself. One of the most persistent seekers was Thomas Penfield, a 19th century prospector and amateur historian. He spent decades scouring the San Juan Mountains, claiming to have found Spanish inscriptions on canyon walls and remnants of old smelting operations. He believed the mine lay somewhere near Wolf Creek Pass, and published numerous letters urging others to continue the search. Penfield died without finding the mine, but his writings still guide modern explorers. Even the famed mapmaker Captain E.N. Stoddard became entangled in the legend. In the early 1900s, he published a hand-drawn map referencing a Josephine lode, supposedly based on old Spanish trails. Though dismissed by many, the map added new fuel to the mystery and has become something of a collector's item among treasure hunters today. So, if the mine existed, why has it never been found? Skeptics suggest it may have been a confusion of multiple, smaller discoveries, a few scattered deposits wrongly linked into a single myth. Others point to natural erosion and seismic activity in the San Juans, which could have collapsed or entirely buried the mine centuries ago. Landslides are common in the region, and even large structures can vanish without a trace beneath rock and snow. Still, some insist the mine is real, and that it remains hidden not by accident, but by design. There are accounts, unverified but intriguing, of carved crosses, stone staircases, and symbols etched into cliff walls that seem to match old Spanish iconography. Some theorists believe the mine is protected by a system of markers or coded maps known only to the descendants of the original expedition. Others suggest that the U.S. government, or even private mining interests, discovered it long ago, but chose to keep it secret for economic or environmental reasons. More fringe voices speak of guardians, either spiritual or human, tasked with protecting the mine from intruders. These stories often borrow from native legends, which describe sacred places in the mountains that should never be disturbed. According to some indigenous traditions, gold itself is not meant to be owned, but honored. The mountains, they say, remember those who come with greed. Even in recent decades, sightings and claims have not ceased. In the 1980s, a geologist hiking near the Continental Divide reported unusual mineral traces and collapsed tunnels in an uncharted basin. In the early 2000s, a local rancher found a rusted pickaxe and Spanish-style boot heel near an isolated ridge, objects later dated to the mid-1800s. Neither discovery led to gold, but both reignited speculation. Is the lost Josephine mine buried beneath centuries of rock, its wealth untouched? Was it looted long ago, its story surviving only as a tantalizing echo? Or has it never existed at all? Merely a tale born of wishful thinking and scattered coincidences. In the high, silent wilderness of the San Juan Mountains, the snow still falls thick over the stone. The wind carries the same chill it did centuries ago, and somewhere out there, perhaps just beyond the next ridge or behind the next outcrop, the truth may still lie waiting for the one who knows how to read the signs. And the question lingers, as it always has. What would you do if you found it? In the silence of the desert, a voice calls from the deep. In the vast and windswept reaches of central Nevada, where the sun scorches the sagebrush and forgotten mining towns crumble beneath the weight of time, the land seems to hum with memory. Low hills rise like frozen waves against the horizon, broken by occasional shafts of rusting steel and collapsed wooden timbers, faint echoes of the silver and gold rush that once transformed this region into a hive of ambition and ruin. One such place, half swallowed by the high desert and nearly erased from modern maps, is an old mining camp near the outskirts of the Shoshone Mountains. Locals call it Whispering Shaft, a name spoken with a mixture of unease and reluctant fascination. It's not listed in any official geological survey. It doesn't appear in most mining records. And yet, those who have wandered too close speak of strange sounds drifting up from its dark, narrow mouth. Sounds that don't belong. A voice, or perhaps many. Whispering. Accounts vary. Some describe faint murmurs, barely audible over the wind. Others claim to hear full phrases, spoken in a language they do not recognize, or worse, in their own voice, saying things they never intended to think. A few say it's not a voice at all, but a low, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat trapped beneath the stone. None of it can be recorded. Audio equipment fails. Recordings return only static. How did it begin? The origin of the mine is difficult to trace. Nevada's boomtown era was chaotic, with countless claims staked and abandoned in the blink of an eye. But some records suggest the shaft may date back to the late 1860s, during the tail end of the Comstock mining frenzy. Prospectors were pushing farther into remote canyons, hoping to strike it rich with veins of silver, lead, or gold. One claim, filed under the name Emerson No. 4, matches the rough location of the Whispering Shaft. It was never a large operation. A few men, a few carts, no big discovery, but the records stop abruptly in 1871. No production totals, no sale of the claim. Just a single final note in the county ledger, abandoned, unstable. Nothing more. The mine fell off the radar for nearly a century, until the 1960s, when a geology student from the University of Nevada stumbled across the site during a summer survey. He noted the strange acoustics near the shaft, how the wind seemed to change pitch around it, how rocks dropped into the dark took longer than expected to hit bottom. He marked the location in his field journal and never returned. Since then, the legend has grown quietly, passed among desert hikers, amateur explorers, and a few curious locals. Stories began to circulate. A pair of campers hearing whispers calling them by name. A radio operator picking up unintelligible chatter only when near the site. A man who claimed the shaft showed up in his dreams weeks before he ever set foot in the region. What lies beneath the mine? Some speculate it connects to a network of natural caverns, where airflow and shifting rock formations might explain the eerie acoustics. Nevada is riddled with limestone caves and geothermal faults, many of which remain unexplored. Could the whispers be the sound of wind moving through a vast subterranean system, filtered and shaped into something we interpret as voices? Others suggest more psychological explanations. The isolation, the dry air, and the oppressive silence of the desert can play tricks on the mind. Auditory hallucinations in remote environments are not unheard of. The expectation of hearing something may in fact create it. But not everyone is convinced. Paranormal investigators who've ventured near the site describe consistent anomalies: compass interference, drained batteries, temperature fluctuations with no discernible source. One team reported hearing a whisper that seemed to move around them in a circle, though no physical cause could be found. Their recordings captured only static and a low hum, inaudible during the actual visit. Some have drawn connections to older indigenous legends of the region. According to certain Shoshone and Paiute oral traditions, the land around the Shoshone Mountains was once believed to be a place where the earth was thin, where voices from the spirit world could be heard, and where wandering souls might become trapped. The stories speak of stone mouths that breathe, and of places where time folds like paper. Does the Whispering Shaft lie atop one of these ancient sites, or is the connection merely a coincidence, a layering of myth over myth, shaped by the human need to explain the unexplained. A more speculative theory emerged in the 1990s, when a fringe researcher claimed the mine was part of a covert military test site, an abandoned project involving deep earth acoustics and subterranean monitoring equipment. He believed the whispers were remnants of old surveillance technology, recordings of long-forgotten voices, trapped in magnetic distortion or geologic anomalies, but no evidence has ever been produced to support this. What remains is a pattern. Over the decades, those who visit the site report a lingering sense of unease. Some feel disoriented. Others describe dreams that follow them for days after. A shadowy descent into darkness, always ending at the edge of the shaft. A few report hearing the whispers, weeks later, at home, far from Nevada. No one has ever gone deep into the mine. The entrance is unstable, prone to collapse. Attempts to lower cameras have failed. Equipment lost or mysteriously damaged. The few who've tried to rappel in have quickly turned back, citing vertigo, nausea, or a sudden and overwhelming sense of dread. And so the mine remains undisturbed. A forgotten scar in the desert, breathing ever so softly. What speaks from the depths of the whispering shaft? Wind and stone? A forgotten past? Or something else entirely? Something that listens as much as it speaks? In Nevada's high desert, the air is thin and silence runs deep. But listen closely, and you may hear the whispers too. Where tragedy meets mystery, and steel rails echo with whispers from the past. South of downtown San Antonio, beneath a wide Texas sky and nestled between quiet suburban streets, a seemingly ordinary railroad crossing has become the source of one of the most persistent and chilling legends in the American Southwest. The road is narrow, flanked by low fences and brush. The tracks themselves are old, weathered, partially overgrown, and largely unused. During the day, the crossing feels unremarkable, almost forgotten. But at night, something changes. Locals call it the ghost crossing. To some, it's just a curiosity. To others, it's sacred ground. The story begins, as many mysteries do, with tragedy. According to legend, sometime in the 1930s or 40s, accounts vary. A school bus filled with children stalled on these very tracks. Moments later, a freight train barreled through, unable to stop in time. The collision was catastrophic. Every child on board, along with the driver, was said to have perished. The community was devastated, the loss becoming a scar etched into the collective memory of the city. But curiously, no newspaper records of the crash have ever been verified. No official documentation exists. Not in city archives, not in railroad logs, not in public obituaries. Could the incident have been real, its memory preserved only through oral history? Or is the entire story a fabrication, born from a different source and woven into local lore over time? Regardless of the origin, something strange does happen here. For decades, visitors have reported a startling phenomenon. If a car is parked on the tracks in neutral, it will slowly begin to move. Uphill, seemingly against gravity, until it has safely cleared the crossing. Some claim to hear faint whispers as this happens. Others report the sound of giggling, fleeting shadows, or the sensation of invisible hands pushing from behind. Skeptics have tried to explain it as an optical illusion. The surrounding landscape, they argue, creates a false horizon. What appears to be uphill is actually downhill. It's a clever trick of perspective, not a paranormal event. Tests with leveling tools and GPS mapping have shown that the road has a gentle downward slope, just enough to allow a vehicle to roll under its own weight. Still, the mystery doesn't end there. Some visitors sprinkle baby powder on the bumper or back of their car before parking on the tracks. When the vehicle rolls forward, they return to find tiny handprints in the powder, small, childlike, as if something, or someone, had indeed pushed them to safety. Detractors claim these prints are simply residues from human contact, made visible by the powder. But those who've tried it themselves insist they cleaned their cars beforehand. The prints, they say, appear only after the car moves. One retired police officer, interviewed anonymously in the 1980s, claimed he once responded to a stalled vehicle at the crossing. While waiting for a tow truck, he said he heard voices, faint but distinct. Laughter, then a child's cry. He never found the source. He never returned. Others have reported more intense experiences: the sudden drop in temperature, strange electronic interference, or even the brief appearance of a small figure standing on the tracks before vanishing without a trace. Is it mass suggestion? A powerful story implanted in the minds of visitors before they even arrive? Or is there something more? Some researchers have suggested that the ghost tracks legend may be a cultural echo, an amalgamation of multiple real events from the early 20th century, possibly combined with known train accidents in other parts of Texas. One particular crash in Salt Lake City, Utah in 1938 involved a school bus and a train and left more than 20 children dead. News of that tragedy circulated widely, and over time it's possible that the horror of it became embedded in local imaginations, even transplanted to other locations. Yet, even if the original event never happened in San Antonio, it doesn't explain the experiences people continue to report at the crossing. In more recent years, the city has attempted to discourage visitors. The tracks are now surrounded by signs and barricades. The area has been repaved, yet stories persist, and some claim that even after all the changes, the phenomena remain. Is it possible that grief and legend have shaped the place itself? That the human need to connect with the past to explain the unexplainable can leave a kind of imprint on the land? Others push the idea further. There are those who believe the site is what paranormal researchers call a residual haunt, a location where traumatic energy plays out again and again, like a recording etched into the environment. In this view, the spirits do not interact directly with the living, but repeat the moments leading up to a tragedy endlessly. A child's laugh, a whisper, the push of a small hand. More fringe theories suggest time anomalies or electromagnetic disturbances beneath the earth, natural features that could account for both mechanical failures and perceived hauntings. The area lies near several underground fault lines and iron-rich mineral veins. Could these geological conditions influence perception, or even store emotional energy in ways science doesn't yet understand? In the end, no one has proven the legend true or false. No historical record confirms the fatal crash. No photograph has captured the whispers. And yet, those who stand at the ghost tracks, who let their car roll forward in the quiet, empty dark, often come away with a deep, unsettling feeling. A sense that something lingers there, something watching, something remembering. What if the past is closer than we think? What if stories, retold enough, take root in the very soil? And in the warm Texas night, where the road rises gently across old rails, who, or what, is still reaching out just to make sure we get home safely? Where once there was promise, only silence remains. Deep in the heart of Alabama, where the Cahaba and Alabama rivers meet in a quiet, tangled floodplain, the ruins of a forgotten town lie shrouded in moss and mist. Trees grow through crumbling brick foundations. Ivy climbs the skeletal remains of iron fences. And the air, thick, still, and humid, carries with it a strange, persistent quiet. This was once Cahaba, Alabama's very first capital. Now, it is little more than a ghost, half swallowed by the forest and time. But Cahaba didn't simply fade. It vanished, its population gone, its records incomplete, and its fate wrapped in unanswered questions. Founded in 1819, Cahaba was chosen as the new state's capital due to its location at the confluence of two major rivers, intended as a symbol of progress and unity. With broad avenues and ambitious plans for public buildings, it quickly grew into a lively center of politics, trade, and culture. Lawmakers, merchants, and settlers poured in. Grand homes were built. Cotton moved freely along the river. The town's future seemed assured. But trouble came early. The rivers that once promised prosperity brought floods, first in 1825, and then again, more severely, in 1828. The rising waters swept into homes and businesses, damaging infrastructure and spreading disease. Though the town recovered each time, its reputation began to sour. Critics argued the location was cursed, unsuitable for a capital and perhaps even for settlement. In 1826, the government relocated the capital to Tuscaloosa, citing health and accessibility concerns. Cahaba's political status was gone, but curiously, the town did not die. Instead, it entered a second life as a cotton distribution hub. By the 1850s, it had rebounded. A bustling commercial district emerged. New churches were built. And during the Civil War, Cahaba became the site of a Confederate prison camp, holding thousands of Union soldiers in often appalling conditions. Then, almost as swiftly as it rose again, Cahaba fell silent. Following the war, economic instability, rail lines bypassing the town, and another series of devastating floods in the late 1860s pushed Cahaba toward abandonment. By the early 1900s, the population had dwindled to just a few dozen. Buildings were dismantled, materials salvaged. Streets, once mapped with precision, were overtaken by forest. But here is where the story shifts from the merely historical to the quietly strange. Unlike other ghost towns of the American South, Cahaba's disappearance is marked by inconsistencies. County records from the late 19th century show abrupt gaps. Property deeds vanish mid-lineage. Entire family histories drop from census rolls without migration records or death notices. Schools are mentioned in letters but leave behind no rosters. Churches are photographed, then never appear in any denominational archive. Was this simply a case of poor record-keeping in a post-war era, or did something deeper take root? Local legends speak of strange occurrences in the final years of Cahaba. Lights seen drifting through the swamp at night. Distant voices heard in the trees. Footsteps on empty roads. The most persistent tale involves the old Crocheron mansion, a grand estate whose staircase was reportedly stained with blood after a mysterious disappearance in 1874. The house no longer stands, but some say if you walk the grounds during the spring flood season, you can still hear piano music coming from the trees. Paranormal researchers have visited the site for years. Some claim high electromagnetic readings in areas where no power lines exist. Others report camera malfunctions, sudden temperature drops, or unexplained sounds during recordings. A few even claim to have seen the outline of buildings that no longer stand. Momentary illusions in the fog, as though the town refuses to fully let go. More speculative theories suggest Cahaba sits atop a convergence point, an intersection of ley lines or energy paths that amplify both human emotion and spiritual residue. Others link it to native burial grounds said to lie beneath the current site. According to some Creek oral histories, the area was once avoided for reasons left intentionally vague, referred to only as a place of shadows. Skeptics argue that Cahaba's collapse is a clear story of environmental miscalculation and economic redirection. Flood-prone and lacking access to the expanding rail networks, It was doomed by geography and time. But even these critics often admit that something about the place feels off. The silence is too deep, the decay too orderly, as if the town didn't die naturally, but was somehow erased. Today, Cahaba is preserved as a historical site. Visitors walk the old streets, marked now only by iron plaques and foundation outlines. The slave cemetery still stands, silent beneath towering oaks. The prison stockade is gone, but the ground where it stood remains barren. No plants grow there. And every so often someone hears a faint sound or catches a glimmer of movement just beyond the edge of their vision. What caused Cahaba to disappear so completely? How did a place of such early promise vanish with so little trace, its people scattered, its records blurred, its name nearly forgotten? Maybe it was the floods. Maybe it was the war. Or maybe, as some still whisper, the town was never meant to endure. And in the warm, mist-laced nights of southern Alabama, where the rivers still meet and the moss hangs heavy, one might wonder if something still lingers where Cahaba once stood, something watching, something waiting, or perhaps something simply remembering, where silence holds secrets and something waits just beyond the ridge. Tucked away in the rugged wilderness of northern New Mexico, far from paved roads and modern settlements, there exists a stretch of land so isolated, so eerily untouched, that locals have long spoken of it with a kind of reluctant reverence. The land is scarred and beautiful, carved by wind and time. Towering cliffs shadow narrow box canyons. The wind moves through dry pine forests, carrying with it the scent of juniper and the faint memory of something lost. This is the valley known by a name as unsettling as it is unforgettable, the Headless Valley. Despite the moniker, this is not a place marked clearly on any official map. Rather, it's a term passed through whispered stories and occasional newspaper mentions, usually centered around the Canadian River Basin near the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The exact location shifts depending on who tells the tale. But the stories share one common thread, a series of mysterious and gruesome disappearances dating back more than a century. Men who ventured into this secluded valley were never seen again, or if they were, they weren't whole. The first recorded case appears in the early 1900s, when a pair of trappers from Colorado allegedly traveled south into New Mexico, lured by rumors of an untouched hunting ground deep within the mountains. Months passed. Only one body was recovered. The second man was never found. But the corpse that was discovered had been mutilated, its head missing, the wounds precise but inexplicable. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away. Authorities called it a bear attack. Others were not so sure. And that was only the beginning. Over the following decades, at least half a dozen similar stories emerged. A prospector found dead near a stream, his belongings intact, his head severed cleanly. A lone hiker in the 1940s, whose tent was discovered fully zipped, his supplies undisturbed, yet his body mutilated and head missing, found nearly a mile away. A group of 3 men in the 1960s who went into the mountains for elk hunting and never returned. Only blood-stained gear and a single boot were found. The pattern was always the same: the decapitations, the lack of obvious animal activity, and the eerie silence of the landscape, as though the land itself conspired to hide what really happened. What could cause such precise and horrific injuries in such a remote, unpopulated area? Mainstream explanations typically point toward environmental hazards. Mountain lions or bears, though rarely known for decapitation, could be involved. Yet, wildlife experts have repeatedly noted that such injuries are atypical, especially given the lack of surrounding disturbance. No drag marks, no scattered remains, and no defensive wounds. Some have proposed a geological explanation. The Canadian River region contains numerous sinkholes, caves, and unstable rock formations. Could falls, rock slides, or sudden collapses cause the injuries reported in these cases? Possibly. But again, investigators found no signs of collapsed terrain or impact trauma that would explain such clean and consistent mutilation. Others suggest that the valley may be the site of undisclosed military testing or covert activity. In the 1950s and 60s, parts of New Mexico were used for a range of secretive experiments, chemical, acoustic, and aerial. Is it possible that this remote location was once the site of classified operations, and that some of the deaths were the result of exposure to unacknowledged technologies? Even more unsettling is the recurring detail found in many survivor and witness accounts of hearing unnatural sounds in the valley, a low humming, a mechanical buzzing, or, in some cases, what one man described as a scream that wasn't human, but wasn't animal either. These sounds were never recorded and always described with hesitation, as if the listeners themselves weren't entirely sure what they had heard. In more speculative circles, the theories turned stranger still. Some claim the valley lies on a fault in the Earth's magnetic field, a so-called window area, where strange phenomena are more likely to occur. This idea draws parallels to other mysterious places like the Bennington Triangle in Vermont or Canada's Nahanni Valley, which also earned a similar nickname, the Valley of the Headless Men. Is there something unique about certain remote landscapes that invites or magnifies unexplained phenomena? Indigenous lore adds another layer. Some elders of the local Pueblo and Apache communities speak, carefully and with restraint, of forbidden places in the high mountains. Places where spirits dwell, or where ancient energies are concentrated. The stories do not always mention death or violence, but rather disappearance, a vanishing that happens quietly, almost willingly, as if something calls people in and never lets them leave. And perhaps the strangest aspect of all, no official investigation has ever led to a concrete conclusion. Law enforcement reports, when they exist, are vague. Some appear to be missing pages. Others were never filed at all. Even state agencies have expressed frustration over the lack of documentation. Was this due to the remoteness of the area, a lack of jurisdiction, or is something being deliberately withheld? Today, few people venture deep into the rumored location of the Headless Valley. Even fewer speak of it openly. Hikers avoid the region after dark. Guides refuse to take clients there, citing dangerous terrain, though when pressed, they say little else. Occasionally, a thrill-seeker or amateur cryptid hunter announces plans to solve the mystery. They rarely follow through. So, what is the Headless Valley truly? A remote corner of New Mexico prone to tragic accidents and embellished stories. The site of an ancient, unrecognized danger, or something else entirely, something not meant to be seen or understood? The land offers no answers, only wind, stone, silence, and every so often a vanishing. And as the sun slips behind the mountains and the shadows stretch across the valley floor, the question remains: what waits in that forgotten place where the rivers twist through the rocks and where names vanish from history, leaving only the echo of footsteps that never returned? Where fortunes rose overnight and disappeared without explanation. In the dry, wind-scoured deserts of southwestern Utah, the old mining town of Frisco now lies in eerie ruin. Crumbling stone walls and rusted iron machinery are all that remain of what was once a booming epicenter of wealth and ambition. The mountains loom over the ghost town, casting long shadows across the valley floor as if guarding secrets buried deep below. Here, beneath the arid soil, lies the Horn Silver Mine, a name still spoken with reverence by historians and prospectors alike. But beyond its legendary riches lies a darker legacy. A collapse so sudden, so devastating, that it not only swallowed part of the mine, but seemingly part of the town's very soul. Over a century later, the Horn Silver Mine collapse remains one of the most puzzling and controversial events in the annals of Western mining history. Discovered in 1875, the Horn Silver lode was unlike anything Utah had seen before. The ore body was vast, rich, and remarkably accessible. Within months, Frisco was transformed from a dusty outpost into one of the wealthiest and wildest towns in the West. By 1885, the mine had produced over $50 million worth of silver, lead, and other valuable metals. A staggering figure for the time. At its height, Frisco boasted a population of over 6,000. There were 21 saloons, several hotels, and even an opera house. But beneath the surface, the mine was being hollowed out at an alarming rate. Massive underground chambers, some stretching hundreds of feet across, were left unsupported, creating a hidden labyrinth of voids beneath the town. Then, on the morning of February 13, 1885, it all gave way. With no warning, a section of the mine collapsed, triggering a chain reaction that destroyed over 900 feet of tunnel and caused a portion of the surface to cave in. Miraculously, few workers were in that area at the time, and the official death toll remains uncertain. Some say none, others whisper of miners whose names were never recorded. But the structural damage was catastrophic. Within weeks, the mine's production slowed to a crawl. By the early 1890s, it had ceased altogether. The official cause? Over-extraction and poor engineering. The massive open stopes had simply grown too large to support themselves. Mining officials chalked it up to human error, ambition outrunning caution. But not everyone accepted that explanation. Almost immediately, rumors began to swirl. Some miners claimed to have heard strange vibrations days before the collapse. Not the creaks and groans typical of unstable rock, but a rhythmic, mechanical sound, like distant machinery pounding deep underground. Others spoke of shafts suddenly flooding with water, despite no known aquifers in the area. A few even reported hallucinations, hearing voices, or seeing figures in abandoned sections of the mine. These accounts were dismissed as the imaginings of overworked men in stressful conditions. But the stories didn't stop. In the decades following the collapse, explorers and historians who visited the ruins reported an unsettling stillness near the mine's mouth. Some experienced nausea or dizziness upon approaching certain areas, effects not easily explained by geology or gas. One researcher, writing in the 1960s, described a persistent sense of pressure in the air, as though something beneath the ground was still moving or watching. There were whispers that the Horn Silver Mine had tapped into more than just minerals. Fringe theorists began connecting the collapse to a broader web of Western mining mysteries. Could the enormous silver lode have formed over a fault line that channeled strange natural energies? Were the miners unknowingly disturbing something ancient, an underground anomaly, or even a long-lost structure buried deep within the earth? Some pointed to the legends of the Fremont and ancestral Puebloan peoples, whose petroglyphs and oral histories spoke of forbidden caverns, sealed long ago, that led to the realm of the star beings, or earth people, terms that, depending on interpretation, describe spirits, ancestors, or something entirely different. One particularly speculative theory suggests that the Horn Silver Mine intersected with one of these ancient pathways, accidentally breaching a chamber that should never have been opened. Proponents of this idea note the lack of consistent seismic activity in the area, arguing that the scale of the collapse could not be fully accounted for by structural weaknesses alone. Still, no physical evidence of anything beyond collapsed rock and abandoned tunnels has ever been found. Geologists maintain that the mine was a victim of its own success, a case study in what happens when extraction outpaces planning. A few scholars have even suggested that the collapse may have been exacerbated, if not entirely caused, by intentional detonations used to cover up mismanagement or embezzlement. According to this theory, key records were quietly destroyed or altered to protect the reputations of investors and company officials. Conveniently, many of the mine's original engineering reports are missing. Could the collapse have been partly man-made, an engineered disaster to bury financial misconduct? Or is it possible that something deeper, more mysterious, lies beneath the dust and stone? Today, the remnants of the Horn Silver Mine sit silent beneath the desert sun. The old headframes are long gone. The tunnels are sealed, or too dangerous to explore. But those who visit Frisco say the place still carries a strange weight, a sense of things left unresolved. The winds whisper down from the mountains, rattling the ruins as if echoing voices from deep below. What truly caused the collapse of the Horn Silver Mine? A cautionary tale of greed and geological ignorance? A cover-up hidden beneath rock and time? Or a brush with something humanity was never meant to uncover? Whatever the answer, it remains entombed in the fractured earth of Utah's desert. A puzzle buried in silver, silence, and shadow, where history meets a whisper and footprints disappear into the desert wind. Just north of the Nevada border, where high desert plains stretch into pale blue sky and the earth seems to hold its breath beneath layers of ancient dust, lies the forgotten territory, once known as Roop County. Today, it's mostly a scattering of scrubland, dry creek beds, and the silent bones of abandoned homesteads. But in the mid-19th century, this windswept landscape was alive with frontier ambition. Yet something about Roop County never quite settled. Literally and figuratively. It was a place caught between worlds, politically uncertain, geographically isolated, and historically elusive. Roop County was established in 1861, the same year Nevada Territory itself was formed. But curiously, Roop wasn't officially in Nevada, nor was it clearly in California. The area straddled the border in such a way that for years, nobody could quite agree on who governed it. This ambiguity gave rise to a jurisdictional oddity, the Sagebrush War, a bloodless but tense standoff in 1863 between militias from Lassen County, California, and Roop County's fledgling government, both claiming control of the same stretch of desert. Eventually, the land was officially awarded to California. Roop County was dissolved, but what remained was not just a historical footnote. It was a place with stories that stretched far beyond mere boundary disputes. Among the most haunting was the slow, quiet disappearance of several settler families from the region, men, women, and children, who seemed to vanish without a trace between 1863 and 1871. These were not isolated incidents. According to local records and surviving correspondence, at least 4 family homesteads were found completely abandoned, meals left half-prepared, wagons intact, livestock still fenced, but no sign of life. In one particularly chilling case, neighbors arrived to find a lantern still burning on the porch, but the house empty. No tracks leading away, no blood, no struggle, just absence. What could explain such sudden vanishings? Mainstream historians often cite environmental hardship. The area was notoriously harsh, prone to drought, winter blizzards, and isolation. Perhaps the settlers simply left in desperation, moving on to more fertile land. But that theory raises more questions than it answers. Why would experienced frontiersmen leave behind valuable possessions? why not inform nearby neighbors or write ahead to relatives, as was common at the time? And why were these disappearances never followed by sightings or letters from those who left? Another explanation involves conflict, either with native populations or with roaming bandits. But by the late 1860s, organized hostilities in the region had largely ceased, and in each case, the abandoned homes showed no signs of forced entry or theft. Firearms were still hanging above door frames. Chests of silver coins remained untouched. And then there were the stranger details. A surveyor passing through the region in 1870 noted an unusual pattern of magnetic interference near one of the abandoned homesteads. His compass, he claimed, spun erratically and failed to settle. Others reported a low humming sound in the early morning hours, coming from the foothills west of the valley. One ranch hand described seeing lights at night like lanterns swinging in the sky, slowly moving across the horizon before blinking out. Fringe researchers have long speculated that Roop County may sit atop a natural anomaly, possibly a fault line, or an area of intense geomagnetic fluctuation. Some go further, suggesting that these disappearances mirror other high-strangeness zones across the world, places like the Bennington Triangle in Vermont, or the Superstition Mountains of Arizona, regions where people don't just go missing, but seem to be erased. Are these simply coincidences, amplified by the distance of time and the human tendency to mythologize what we cannot explain? Or did Roop County contain something genuinely unknown, something that even now has yet to be uncovered beneath the shifting desert soil? Adding to the mystery is the discovery, decades later, of artifacts buried far from where they belonged. In 1922, a group of miners unearthed a rusted locket near Eagle Lake, containing a photograph and initials matching those of a young woman who had vanished from Roop County in 1868. The site was nearly 30 miles from her homestead. No one could explain how the locket had traveled so far, or why it was buried 6 feet underground in untouched soil. More recently, in the 1980s, amateur historians rediscovered one of the lost homestead sites using period maps. What they found was chilling. The cabin's foundation still intact, and a single, unbroken child's shoe half buried in the dust. No remains, no graves. Just the outline of lives cut off, and questions stretching across more than a century. Even now, the area retains its peculiar aura. Locals in nearby Susanville and Ravendale tell of strange lights, sudden cold drafts, and an unnatural stillness that descends on the land at twilight. Few camp in the old Roop County territory. Fewer still explore it without unease. What really happened to the settlers of Roop County? Were they victims of environment, violence, or simply the hardships of frontier life? Or did they encounter something we do not yet understand? Something that could still lie waiting beneath the brittle crust of a forgotten land? A land with no official name anymore. Just silence, dust, and stories carried by the wind. And as the sun dips behind the western mountains, casting long shadows over the ghostly remains of Roop County, we're left to wonder, did something take them? Or did the land itself call them and never let them leave, where dreams of sudden fortune crumbled into dust and the earth kept its secret? High in the eastern Sierra Nevada, where ancient pines clutch the slopes and jagged granite ridges cut sharply into the sky, there lies a vast and lonely expanse. Between Mono Lake's ghostly tufa towers and the desolate volcanic fields stretching toward the Nevada border, the air thins and the silence deepens. The terrain is both beautiful and unforgiving, a place where sunlight gleams harshly off bare stone, and the trails of men vanish as quickly as the winds can rise. It was here, sometime in the early 1850s, that one of the strangest and most enduring mysteries of the Wild West first took root: the tale of the lost cement mine. Despite the name, the story is not about building materials. Cement, in the language of 19th century miners, referred to a particular type of hard, reddish rock, often mistaken for poor ore, that occasionally revealed extraordinary riches. According to legend, the cement found near Mono Lake wasn't just mineral-laced. It glittered with nearly pure gold. The earliest known account comes from two prospectors traveling east from California's gold country toward Nevada. Struggling for food and water, they reportedly stumbled upon a strange outcrop of blood-red rock in a narrow canyon. As one man, a Dr. Randall, examined a broken piece, he noticed it sparkled with veins of gold so thick it seemed unnatural. He later described the rock as being like hard putty mixed with gold dust. Though desperate to continue their journey, the pair marked the spot as best they could and made a pact to return. But the journey proved too much. Only one man, Randall, survived to tell the tale. His companion died of exhaustion not far from Mono Lake. And when Randall eventually tried to retrace his steps the following spring, the mine was gone. Or perhaps it was never there at all. The story circulated among prospectors and drifters for decades. Each retelling added new flourishes: a map etched into a tin plate, a dead man's journal found under a boulder, a ghostly figure warning travelers to turn back. But underneath the embellishments, one core truth remained unshaken. Multiple men over multiple decades claimed to have seen or held the mysterious cement ore, but no one could find it again. In 1860, the tale took on new life when U.S. Army Scout James Wright, stationed at Fort Tejon, overheard an ailing miner describe the lost site in vivid detail. The miner allegedly possessed a small lump of the cement rock, heavy with gold, but refused to give up its location. When he died a few days later, Wright and others mounted expeditions to the eastern Sierra, hoping to recover the trail. They failed. More searches followed. Dozens of men combed the region between Mono Lake, Mammoth Mountain, and the Owens Valley. They found quartz veins, scattered placer deposits, and a few strange outcroppings, but never the mother lode described by Randall. By the 1870s, some began to speculate that the story was a fabrication, a fevered dream of a dying man, or a hoax passed from campfire to campfire. And yet, samples believed to be from the original cement ore occasionally surfaced in remote outposts. Assayed by independent labs, some reportedly contained up to $2,000 per ton in gold, a staggering sum for the time. Why would such an extraordinarily rich find never be relocated? Geologists have offered several theories. The Sierra Nevada range is geologically complex, marked by glacial activity, frequent landslides, and unstable rock formations. Entire hillsides can shift in a single season. A canyon visible one year might be hidden under rockfall the next. The red cement ore may have come from a narrow vein exposed briefly by erosion, and then buried again. Lost not by design, but by the slow churn of the mountain itself. Others point to human error. The early prospectors may have misjudged their exact location. Without modern mapping tools, it was easy to confuse one canyon for another. Snowmelt, flooding, or volcanic activity in nearby Long Valley could have altered the terrain subtly but permanently. And then there are the stranger interpretations. Some believe the lost cement mine lies on a fault line of more than just rock, a place where history, geography, and perception blur. Paranormal researchers note that the area surrounding Mono Lake has long been steeped in mystery. Indigenous Paiute legends speak of forbidden places in the high country, zones where spirits dwell, and where trespassers are rarely welcomed back. Certain ridgelines are avoided to this day by locals who speak of strange lights, inexplicable gusts of wind, and a feeling of being watched. A few even suggest the gold itself was never of this world. Could the strange red rock have been meteoric in origin, deposited by some unknown celestial event centuries ago? This theory, far-fetched though it sounds, gained attention after reports of other gold-rich meteorites found in remote areas across the American West. No scientific proof links such events to the cement ore, but the idea lingers in the more speculative circles of Western lore. Still, the most haunting aspect of the story remains its silence. No conclusive evidence has ever confirmed the existence of the mine. No photographs, no marked coordinates, no physical structure remains. Only the words of long-dead men and the weight of gold said to have been held and lost beneath the sunlit stone of the Sierra. And yet, the region still draws the curious. Each year, a few treasure hunters arrive with GPS systems, old maps, and hope. They follow clues buried in 19th century journals. They compare mineral samples to century-old assay results. They peer into shadowed canyons and whisper the name of a place that might never have existed. But what if it did? What if, somewhere between the shifting rock and the fading memory of the frontier, the lost cement mine still waits, its riches hidden by time, or design, or something stranger still? In the Sierra Nevada, where the winds never stop and the earth remembers everything, perhaps the answer is still buried just beneath our feet. In a town haunted by its violent past, some say the echoes still speak. Beneath the relentless sun of southern Arizona, the town of Tombstone sits quietly, its dusty streets preserved like a page torn from a history book. Weathered wooden storefronts lean slightly with age, their hand-painted signs still advertising general stores, saloons, and gunsmiths. Tourists walk the same roads once traveled by outlaws and lawmen, where names like Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, and the Clantons still linger in legend. But there's another story buried deeper in Tombstone soil, one that is less known and far stranger. In a small, unassuming cemetery just outside the historic town limits, Boot Hill Graveyard, there are graves that do not rest easy, not because of what's written on their markers, but because of what lies beneath them. Among the many legends whispered in this ghost town, few are as chilling, or as enduring, as the tales of the Whispering Skulls. The reports go back generations. Locals and visitors alike have claimed to hear faint murmurs while passing by certain graves, often late at night or during still, windless dawns. Some describe voices barely louder than a breath, disembodied conversations, chants, or moaning that seems to rise from the earth itself. Others speak of a strange pressure in the air, a ringing in the ears, or the unshakable feeling of being watched, even in broad daylight. But it's not just the whispers that unsettle. It's the bones. In the early 1900s, a grave-digging crew working near Boot Hill reportedly uncovered several skulls during a reburial effort. These skulls, according to first-hand accounts, were not part of the known interments. They bore unusual markings, strange etchings or shallow carvings resembling symbols. And, most unsettling of all, some appeared to have been deliberately placed in upright positions, as if set to watch over the graves around them. The skulls were reburied quietly, without official documentation. But the stories spread. A few years later, a visiting journalist from El Paso claimed to have held one of these skulls, describing it as unnaturally light, with a texture too smooth for its age. He reported hearing a soft voice in his ear as he lifted it, though he was alone at the time. The article was never published. Only his notes remain, passed down through a private collector and now part of Tombstone folklore. So what explains these strange accounts? Are they mere echoes of Tombstone's violent past? Or is there something more unusual at play? From a historical perspective, it's no secret that Boot Hill is the final resting place for many who died violently. Gunfighters, criminals, and unknown drifters. Records were hastily kept, if at all. Some were buried where they fell, others tossed into mass graves. Could these whispering skulls be nothing more than misidentified remains, disturbed and displaced by time? One explanation suggests that the so-called whispers may result from environmental phenomena. The desert wind, passing over uneven terrain or through porous rock, can create subtle acoustic effects, murmurs, hums, or echoes that sound eerily human. Certain minerals in the region also affect magnetic fields, possibly causing disorientation, auditory hallucinations, or even electromagnetic interference with modern recording devices. Skeptics argue that what people hear is simply their own brain interpreting natural stimuli under the weight of suggestion. But not everyone is convinced. Anthropologists have noted that the markings reportedly seen on the skulls are consistent with certain indigenous ceremonial practices, not native to southern Arizona, but found among tribal groups in Mesoamerica. Could it be that some of these skulls were not victims of frontier violence at all, but relics brought to the region in antiquity? Trade routes once connected what is now Arizona with ancient civilizations far to the south. Might these skulls be remnants of something much older, placed intentionally as part of a ritual long forgotten? Even more speculative is the theory that the skulls are not relics at all, but artifacts of something entirely anomalous. Paranormal investigators who've studied the Boot Hill site claim that electronic voice phenomena, EVPs, are unusually strong near certain graves. Audio captured on location includes indecipherable murmuring, repeating phrases in languages not clearly identifiable, and in one instance, what sounded like a warning. Leave the Watchers be. Who or what are the Watchers? Some fringe theorists tie the whispering skulls to a broader motif found in folklore across cultures, the notion of sentinel spirits or talking bones that protect sacred ground. In Tibetan and African traditions, skulls were sometimes used in religious ceremonies as vessels of wisdom or spiritual guardians. Could similar practices have found their way somehow to the American West? One thing is certain. Those who have held the skulls, or claim to, often describe a profound emotional reaction: fear, sadness, nausea. Others say they feel compelled to speak aloud while in their presence, as if being questioned by an unseen entity. And then there are the disappearances. Over the past 70 years, there have been at least 3 documented cases of amateur treasure hunters who entered the Boot Hill area after dark, illegally, in search of rumored valuables buried with the dead. None of them were harmed, but each returned shaken. One man abandoned his search abruptly, refusing to speak of what he saw. Another fled in the middle of the night, reportedly hearing voices that followed him into the desert. A third, according to police records, was found wandering barefoot miles from town, whispering to himself about the heads in the ground. Today, Boot Hill is both a tourist attraction and a sacred site. The town of Tombstone thrives on its legends, but the locals maintain a quiet respect for the cemetery. Some still leave small offerings, coins, flowers, even carved stones, at unmarked graves. Few linger there after dark. So what are the whispering skulls of Tombstone? Artifacts of a forgotten culture? Psychological projections born of violent history? Or silent sentinels still guarding secrets buried beneath Arizona's desert floor? In a town where the line between myth and memory blurs with every sun-bleached day, perhaps the whispers are not just imagined. Perhaps they are a reminder that the past is not truly dead, and that in places like Tombstone, some stories are still being told, even if no one is there to hear them. Where water meets desert, and time may still echo in hoofbeats. At the edge of the Sonoran Desert, where the relentless sun scorches the cracked earth and the Colorado River winds with stubborn persistence, lies Yuma Crossing, a natural bottleneck that for centuries served as a gateway between civilizations. Here, just above the confluence of river and desert, the landscape flattens into a parched corridor of dust and heat, marked only by the skeletal remains of old trails, half-buried wagon ruts, and forgotten outposts. It was once one of the most vital junctures of the American Southwest. Long before the first American settlers arrived, native tribes like the Quechan used the crossing for trade and migration. Later, Spanish expeditions forged paths here, and by the mid-19th century, Yuma had become a critical link for westbound pioneers and the rapidly expanding stagecoach lines that stitched the continent together. But among these dust-covered trails, one story endures. Strangely persistent, oddly specific, and still whispered in desert towns between Arizona and California. The tale of the Phantom Stagecoach. According to numerous accounts dating back as early as the 1870s, travelers in the region, particularly those journeying alone or camping near the old trail, have reported hearing the unmistakable sound of horses at full gallop, accompanied by the heavy creak of wagon wheels and the jingle of harness chains. Yet, when they look up, the desert remains empty. Others go further. They claim to have seen it. A shadowy black Concord coach pulled by 4 horses, emerging from the shimmer of heat mirage only to vanish without a trace. No dust kicked up, no tracks left behind, no sound once it passes. Some describe its windows as dark, veiled. A few say they've seen a lantern swinging from its side, flickering in the windless night. But perhaps the most unsettling reports come from those who've stood close to the trail itself. Witnesses who swear the coach passed within yards of them, without making a sound. One man in the 1920s, a railroad worker camped outside Yuma, wrote in a letter that he saw the coach glide over the sand as if it floated, wheels turning, but never sinking. Is this simply folklore born of the desert's deceptive nature? Mirage and memory playing tricks in a harsh and lonely landscape? Possibly, but the details of the story suggest something more rooted in real history. In the 1850s and 60s, Yuma Crossing was not only a major stop for the Butterfield overland mail route, it was also a site of frequent danger. The river itself posed a perilous obstacle during floods, and the surrounding territory was often lawless. Bandit attacks were not uncommon, and many stagecoaches carried precious cargo, gold, payroll, mail, or military dispatches. One particular story seems to echo through nearly every version of the Phantom legend. That of a stagecoach that vanished without a trace en route from Tucson to San Diego, sometime in the 1870s. No official record of this disappearance has been confirmed. However, anecdotal accounts from the time describe a westbound coach that never arrived at its destination. The search party found no wreckage, no bodies, no sign of attack, only a few scattered hoofprints leading toward the river, and then nothing. Could this be the origin of the legend? A single, inexplicable disappearance giving birth to generations of ghost stories? Or is the truth more layered? Some researchers propose that the Phantom Stagecoach is a composite myth, one formed over decades from multiple tragedies and sightings. They point to the high number of recorded deaths near Yuma Crossing throughout the late 19th century. Stagecoaches overturned in flash floods, passengers lost in the desert, ambushes by outlaws who disappeared into the night. In one case, A mail coach carrying $20,000 in gold coin was attacked near Gila Bend, with the treasure never recovered. Could these fragmented events have merged into a single spectral narrative? Others lean toward psychological explanations. The desert is known to play tricks on the senses. Under extreme heat, the horizon dances, and distances warp. The rhythmic sounds of metal on metal, or hoofbeats, can echo strangely between rock formations. Combine this with isolation, exhaustion, and the weight of legend, and you have a perfect recipe for shared hallucination. And yet, the consistency of the reports is hard to ignore. Witnesses across more than a century have described nearly identical details: the style of the coach, the number of horses, the quiet urgency of its passage, and the way it dissolves into the heat or vanishes beyond the rise. These aren't vague stories of something strange. They're detailed, personal, often matter of fact. In the 1980s, a highway patrolman near Dome Valley filed an incident report after seeing what he believed was a runaway wagon crossing the old service road at twilight. When he reached the site, there was no trace, no prints, no sign of anyone else for miles. He later admitted he thought it might have been a trick of the light, until 2 hikers reported the exact same sighting the following day. Even today, travelers along the old trail, now partially shadowed by Interstate 8, sometimes pull over to listen, to watch, to feel the sudden drop in air pressure said to accompany the phantom's arrival. Some bring recording equipment. None have produced definitive evidence. So, what is it that moves across the Yuma sands, just out of reach? Is it memory etched into the landscape? A kind of residual echo of an event so sudden, so unresolved, that it plays over and over like a worn record? Or could it be something more mysterious? A remnant of time itself, bleeding through the cracks of a world that once moved by horses and wheels, now crossed by headlights and diesel. Or perhaps the stagecoach never stopped running. Perhaps, somewhere out there, between heat and horizon, it's still searching for the road it lost, for a destination it never reached, and so the desert holds its silence. But if you find yourself near Yuma Crossing on a still, moonless night, listen carefully. That faint clatter in the distance, that might just be the wind, or it might be something else entirely, where the hills once echoed with silver, and something else may still walk the tunnels. Nestled in the arid expanse of California's Mojave Desert, the ghost town of Calico clings to the sun-baked hills like the memory of a forgotten dream. Bleached wooden buildings lean beneath the unforgiving sky, their windows darkened, their porches long empty. Jagged ridgelines surround the town, carved with crumbling mine shafts and labyrinthine tunnels that snake deep beneath the earth. At midday, the rocks blaze in the sun, glowing with hues of copper, crimson, and dust. At night, shadows gather in the gullies, and silence falls hard, broken only by the desert wind. Calico was once alive with noise, movement, and the feverish ambition of men chasing silver. Founded in 1881, after rich veins of ore were discovered in the hills, it rapidly became one of the most productive mining towns in the West. Within just a few years, Calico boasted over 500 mines, more than 20 saloons, hotels, a schoolhouse, a Chinatown district, and even its own newspaper. It was a town built on silver dreams, and the backs of those willing to risk everything underground. But, like so many places in the boom and bust West, Calico's glory was short-lived. When silver prices plummeted in the mid-1890s, the town was abandoned almost overnight. What was once a bustling outpost of hope was left to decay in the desert sun. And yet, Calico never truly died. At least, not in the minds of those who still claim to see one of its most enduring mysteries: the ghost miner. The earliest recorded account comes from the 1920s, decades after the town's collapse, when a surveyor working alone near the Maggie mine claimed he saw a man in 19th century mining garb standing motionless on the ridge at dusk. When the surveyor called out, the figure turned and disappeared, as if swallowed by the hillside itself. Similar sightings have followed. Tour guides, hikers, even park rangers have described encountering a solitary figure, dust-covered, bearded, and always silent, wandering the paths between the ruins. Some say he carries a lantern. Others report hearing the distant clink of pickaxe against stone, echoing faintly from mine shafts that should have been long silent. There have even been claims of voices underground, low, indecipherable murmurs that seem to recede as one draws near. Who, or what, is the ghost miner of Calico? Some suggest a specific identity, a miner named Joe Hardluck Walters, a real man recorded in Calico's census in the late 1880s. According to local lore, Joe died during a shaft collapse in the Odessa mine after returning for one last haul. His body was never recovered. A few researchers have traced fragments of newspaper clippings and second-hand diaries suggesting a recovery crew gave up after 3 days, convinced the tunnel was too unstable. Joe was sealed in forever. Could it be his restless spirit still roams the place where he drew his final breath? Others offer a more general explanation. In towns like Calico, where many died young, accidents, illness, violence, it's not surprising that ghost stories would emerge. Calico's hospital logs, what remains of them, document frequent mine-related injuries and deaths, explosions, cave-ins, gas inhalation, even murder. Could the ghost miner represent not one man, but many? A collective imprint of the lives lost in pursuit of silver? Skeptics argue the stories are simply a product of suggestion. The environment lends itself to eerie experiences, sudden temperature drops in shaded canyons, the creaking of old wooden beams in the wind, the naturally echoing acoustics of rock-cut tunnels. When combined with local legends and visual cues, abandoned gear, preserved shacks, rusted ore carts, it's easy to imagine a presence that isn't there. But some incidents defy easy dismissal. In 1962, a pair of amateur historians staying overnight to catalog the mine entrances claimed to have seen a figure emerge from the Maggie mine well past midnight, walking with a limp and carrying a lantern. They followed, thinking it was a fellow researcher. But when they reached the end of the trail, no one was there. Only a single boot print in the dust, oddly fresh, but abruptly ending at a rock ledge. In the 1980s, infrared imaging used in the old Calico schoolhouse picked up a heat signature moving through a room that had been empty for hours. The operators assumed a technical glitch, until a second, independent camera caught the same figure, visible only in the thermal spectrum, walking slowly toward a sealed door. More recently, in the early 2000s, a well-known California paranormal group conducted an overnight investigation. While their audio recordings mostly captured creaks and wind, one distinct anomaly stood out. A soft voice, breathy and low, repeating the words, "still working," over and over. There was no one else on the site at the time of the recording. Is the ghost miner of Calico merely a reflection of our fascination with the Old West? A psychological echo of the men who once toiled here? Or is something else walking the hills at night, bound to this sun-baked place by history, memory, or something stranger still? And what of the mines themselves? Though many have been sealed for safety, a few tunnels remain accessible, mapped and stabilized. Yet, even those familiar with the terrain admit that some entrances seem to shift, appearing in one spot and vanishing weeks later. Could entire shafts remain hidden beneath the dust, untouched since the 1890s? If so, what stories and bodies might still lie inside? In Calico, the line between past and present blurs easily. The wind still carries the scent of scorched earth and old wood. The sun casts long shadows through broken doorways. And if you listen closely, just past sunset, when the tourists are gone and the town stands still, you might hear something else. A voice, a shuffle of boots on gravel, the metallic ring of a pickaxe striking stone. Calico may be a ghost town in name, but for those who felt the presence of the miner who never left, that title carries more meaning than most. And so we're left to wonder, does the spirit of Calico linger in its silent hills? Or are we simply hearing echoes of labor, of loss, of lives carved into the earth and remembered in whispers, where the wind never rests, and the earth remembers what the eye can no longer see? Stretching endlessly beneath a sky too wide to hold, the staked plains, Llano Estacado, span parts of modern-day Texas and eastern New Mexico. This vast, windswept plateau is one of the flattest expanses of land in North America, marked not by towering mountains or deep canyons, but by its stark, horizonless immensity. During the day, heat ripples over the dry grasses and sun-baked earth. At night, the stars blaze unobstructed across the dome of the heavens. It is a land of silence and shadow, where time seems suspended. To early Spanish explorers, the plains were both a marvel and a menace. They named it Llano Estacado, literally the staked plain, perhaps referencing the wooden stakes they used to mark their route in the otherwise featureless terrain. Or perhaps the name referred to the jagged escarpments and mesas that break the monotony like ancient, forgotten fortresses. Either way, the plains quickly earned a reputation for being harsh, strange, and at times, haunted. Among the many legends whispered across the wind-carved settlements of West Texas and New Mexico, few are as enduring or as eerie as the tale of the ghostly herd. The first written reports of this phenomenon date back to the late 1800s, but oral traditions among indigenous peoples and early settlers suggest it may go back much further. Witnesses describe the same thing again and again: the thunder of distant hooves rising suddenly from the stillness, the low rumble of a stampede crossing a land where no cattle can be seen. Some have heard the deep, mournful bellows of longhorns in the dead of night, echoing over the open plains with no source in sight, and a few, just a few, claim to have seen them. According to these accounts, the herd appears as if out of nowhere, moving swiftly across the land, hooves kicking up dust that never settles. The animals are described as gaunt, spectral versions of Texas longhorns, eyes glowing faintly, their bodies half translucent in the moonlight, horns curled like question marks against the night sky. The herd does not acknowledge the living. It runs in silence, then fades back into the earth, vanishing without a sound. Could this be merely folklore? A ghost story born of isolation and the uncanny vastness of the plains? Perhaps, but several historical events add depth to the legend. In the 1870s and 1880s, the Staked Plains became a major corridor for cattle drives moving north from Texas to the railheads in Kansas. Thousands of longhorns passed through these lands, driven by cowboys who endured dust storms, snake bites, and night terrors in equal measure. Stampedes were a constant danger. A loud noise, thunder, a dropped tin cup, even a cough in the dark, could send hundreds of animals barreling across the prairie, destroying everything in their path. One infamous stampede, recorded near present-day Lubbock, reportedly claimed the lives of over 200 cattle and 3 cowboys, trampled beneath hooves during a storm. The survivors, shaken and sleep-deprived, swore that after burying the dead, they could still hear the hooves, night after night, for weeks. Ranch logs from the period note missing herds and inexplicable noises. Could the trauma of these events have left an imprint on the land? Some researchers believe the phenomenon may be a case of residual haunting, a term used in paranormal studies to describe events so emotionally charged that they seem to replay in the environment like a broken record. Unlike intelligent hauntings, residual hauntings are not conscious entities but echoes, energy trapped in time. The death cries of cattle, the panic of cowboys, the weight of loss repeating itself in the stillness of the plains. Others look to geology for answers. The Llano Estacado sits on a bed of limestone and quartz-rich rock, which, under the right conditions, may generate what some fringe theorists call stone tape phenomena. The idea is that emotional or traumatic events imprint themselves onto the mineral-rich environment, later released under specific weather or electromagnetic conditions. Could certain spots on the plains act as natural playback devices for the past? Of course, not all explanations drift into the unexplained. Some suggest that the phenomenon has a biological basis. Coyotes or distant wild horses, whose hoofbeats can travel great distances on quiet nights, might be mistaken for something more ghostly, especially by travelers unfamiliar with the region. Auditory mirages, amplified by the flat terrain and shifting air densities, could explain the sounds. Combine that with the isolation of the landscape and the suggestive power of local legend, and it's not hard to see how stories become sightings. Yet, even skeptics must reckon with the consistency of the accounts. Farmers, hunters, historians, and tourists alike have all reported hearing the phantom hooves. Some say the sound builds slowly, like a storm on the horizon, only to vanish as quickly as it came. Others describe an overwhelming sense of dread moments before it begins, as if the air itself were bracing for impact. And then there's the question of the bell. A particularly curious detail recurs in several first-hand reports. The sound of a lone cowbell, jangling amid the thunder, out of rhythm and distant, as if marking the presence of a lead steer or a ghostly sentinel guiding the dead. But no such bell has ever been found, and there are no living herds for miles when it's heard. Why do these stories persist? Why this place, this sound, this imagery of a herd that never stops running? The staked plains are, by their nature, a place of disorientation. With no landmarks, one can lose their sense of time and space quickly. To the ancient people who crossed them, and to the settlers who braved them later, the plains were a place where the rules of the world seemed to blur, where sky and ground met in an endless mirror, and where even the living might become lost in the echoes of the past. Perhaps the ghostly herd is just that, an echo. Or perhaps it is a reminder, carried on the wind, that some movements leave trails too deep for time to erase. So the question lingers. On those quiet, breathless nights when the stars shine down over the empty plains, and the ground begins to tremble ever so slightly beneath your feet, is it just your imagination? Or are they still running, forever unseen, forever heard, the ghostly herd of the staked plains, where justice once rode the open range and vanished without a trace? The high desert of southern Arizona rolls across the landscape like an ancient, time-worn blanket. Dry washes carve shallow veins into red earth. Mesquite trees hunch in the heat, and sandstone bluffs stand like silent sentinels above it all. In the golden light of late afternoon, the land turns to flame. Rust-colored dust swirling beneath vast skies where even silence seems to echo. It is a place that remembers, where ruins of old forts and forgotten stage stops whisper the names of men long gone. In this rugged frontier, not far from the borderlands near Tucson and the Chiricahua Mountains, one name once carried weight: Judge Harlan Joseph, a circuit-riding magistrate who came to be known simply as the Galloping Judge. appointed in the early 1880s to bring legal order to Arizona territory. Joseph was unlike most men of the law. He didn't wait for crime to come to the court. He took justice with him, riding alone between distant towns, conducting hearings in saloons, barns, or under the open sky wherever disputes demanded resolution. He was known for his stern demeanor, his unwavering sense of duty, and, perhaps most famously, his horse, a striking black gelding named Charlemagne. Locals claimed the pair could ride 40 miles in a day and still deliver a full ruling by nightfall. To many, Joseph became a symbol of frontier justice, fair, tireless, incorruptible. But on a warm morning in June of 1889, both he and Charlemagne rode out from the mining town of Tombstone and were never seen again. No body was found, no gear, no trail, only questions. Joseph had been headed east toward the settlement of Dos Cabezas, a dusty outpost nestled near the base of the mountains that shared its name. He'd received word of a land dispute escalating into violence, a common affair in those turbulent years where ownership was often decided by gunpowder more than paperwork. Witnesses saw him leave town at first light, saddle packed with documents and a Colt holstered at his side. The sky was clear, his route well known, but he never arrived. When news of his absence reached Tombstone, a search party was organized. Experienced scouts combed the region, canyons, arroyos, and hidden water holes, looking for any trace of the judge or his mount. What they found only deepened the mystery. A single horseshoe print near Dragoon Pass, leading into a narrow canyon, and then nothing. The trail ended abruptly, as if both horse and rider had simply disappeared into thin air. Naturally, explanations followed. The most immediate theory was ambush. Judge Joseph had made enemies in his time, land barons, rustlers, even corrupt sheriffs who found his presence inconvenient. Perhaps someone had lured him into a trap and concealed the evidence. But if so, where was the body? And why risk killing a federal appointee, knowing the U.S. Marshals would respond with vengeance? Another theory suggested he fell victim to the elements. Flash floods in the summer could sweep away a man and horse alike. But the weather on that day had been dry and calm. And, in any case, some trace, a saddlebag, a hat, a piece of clothing, should have surfaced. None did. More curious still were the stories that began to surface in the years that followed. In 1892, a ranch hand working near Skeleton Canyon claimed he saw a man matching Joseph's description. Same broad hat, same long coat, riding alone through the hills at dusk. He waved, but the rider did not respond. A second sighting came in 1901, this time from a railroad worker near the New Mexico border. Again, a black horse, a lone rider, silent. Moving swiftly through terrain few men would cross alone. Were these mistaken identities, or something more elusive? Local legend grew around the Galloping judge, some claiming he had never died at all, that he'd gone rogue, abandoning the bench to become a vigilante, dispensing justice outside the bounds of the law. Others whispered of darker possibilities, that he had unearthed some frontier secret, perhaps related to land fraud, hidden treasure, or ancient ruins, and had been silenced for it. Some even believed he had discovered something not meant to be found. Then there are the stranger stories. In the mid-20th century, hikers near the Chiricahuas reported hearing the rhythmic beat of a single horse galloping across hard ground in the dead of night. Yet no rider ever appeared. A group of Boy Scouts camping in the Dos Cabezas foothills in the 1970s claimed to see a man on a black horse watching them from the ridgeline. When they called out, he turned and vanished behind the rocks. Investigators found no tracks, and in one especially odd account, A prospector in the 1980s came forward with a weathered journal. He said he'd discovered inside a sealed cave. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the signature, H.J., appeared repeatedly. The entries were lucid at first, discussing legal cases and travel. But the final pages descended into fragmented sentences, speaking of eyes in the rocks, a door without key or lock, and the desert that judges all. The journal's authenticity has never been confirmed. So, what became of Judge Harlan Joseph? Was he murdered and buried where no one would look? Was he a casualty of the land he swore to govern? Did he lose his way, or find one none of us yet understand? His disappearance remains one of the strangest mysteries of the American frontier, an unsolved case bound up with a man who symbolized the very concept of resolution. And in that irony, perhaps, lies the story's power. A judge whose final verdict was swallowed by the land he once ruled over. The desert remembers what the law cannot. And on certain nights, beneath the Arizona stars, when the wind is still and the trails run dark, some say you can hear hoofbeats, steady, unwavering, passing just beyond the ridge. Is it only wind and imagination, or is the galloping judge still riding across a frontier where justice and mystery are never quite finished? As we leave behind the hoofbeats of the galloping judge, the desert leads us deeper into more forbidding terrain, where the law was never written in ink, but carved into stone by heat, time, and the unknown. Here, nestled within a secluded ravine in the parched wilderness of southwestern Utah, lies a place where nature behaves in strange, almost hostile ways. Locals call it Devil's Canyon, a name earned not through folklore alone, but through the terrain's stark defiance of explanation. Rugged sandstone cliffs tower over a narrow gorge, their surfaces scorched by centuries of wind and searing sun. The air hangs dry and still, heavy with the scent of minerals and scorched sagebrush. Wildlife avoids the heart of the canyon. The silence is profound, broken only by the occasional creak of stressed rock or the eerie whistle of a desert breeze funneling through the narrow corridors. But it is not the silence that unsettles visitors to Devil's Canyon. It is the spring. Near the canyon's deepest hollow lies a small pool of water. At first glance, it seems like an oasis, a shimmering patch of blue in a land defined by thirst. Yet, as one draws closer, something feels wrong. The water churns slowly, despite the absence of visible inflow. Its surface bubbles steadily, not violently, but with a quiet persistence that seems unnatural. No steam rises, no sulfurous smell fills the air. Yet the temperature of the water remains inexplicably warm year-round, hot enough to scald but never boil. Locals call it the boiling spring. Its presence is unrecorded on most geological surveys. No known fault line passes beneath it. No active volcanic activity lies nearby. And yet the spring endures, unchanging, quietly brooding, defying explanation. The earliest known reference to the spring comes from a fur trapper's journal dated 1826. He described the spring as a devil's eye, watching and hot, as though hell burned below. Throughout the 19th century, stories of the spring passed from mouth to mouth among frontier travelers, prospectors, and outlaws. Some said it was cursed. Others believed it was a portal to the underworld. Superstition fueled by the strange symbols etched into rocks nearby. Spirals, horned figures, and geometric patterns carved long before settlers arrived. Were these ancient petroglyphs the work of the Fremont culture who inhabited this region from roughly 300 to 1300 AD? If so, what did the spring mean to them? Some believe the markings are protective symbols, meant to ward off something believed to dwell within or beneath the pool. Others interpret the imagery as a map, perhaps a warning. The spring itself resists typical classification. Unlike geothermal features in Yellowstone or the volcanic hot springs of Northern California, the boiling spring exists in isolation, unsupported by any surrounding hydrothermal activity. Geologists who have studied the site are perplexed. Its water chemistry does not match nearby aquifers, suggesting a unique and unknown source. Temperature probes show steady internal heat, but fail to detect any significant geothermal gradient in the surrounding rock. Could it be an unknown vent of geothermal origin, some rogue fissure feeding heat upward from the Earth's interior? Or could the spring's warmth stem from chemical reactions deeper underground, such as oxidizing pyrite or decaying organic matter, trapped beneath a collapsed cavern system? These are possibilities, but none fully account for the constancy of the heat or the phenomena reported by those who visit. For generations, strange reports have surrounded the spring. Some claim electronic devices malfunction near the site. Compasses spin aimlessly. Camera batteries drain without warning. Others describe feeling disoriented, as if time stretches or compresses around them. One surveyor in the 1960s wrote that after spending 20 minutes at the spring, he checked his watch to find nearly 2 hours had passed. He left in a panic and never returned. Even more curious are the auditory anomalies. Hikers have described faint voices, or what sounds like them, rising from the canyon near the spring. Not screams or words, but murmurs, just at the edge of intelligibility. Whispers that move with the wind but don't seem to belong to it. Skeptics point to natural explanations. Subterranean gas pockets might account for the bubbling. Fault lines, though unmapped, could lie hidden. And the voices? Echoes distorted by the acoustics of the canyon walls. Yet no natural explanation can fully explain the consistency or the intensity of the experiences described. There's also the matter of what's gone missing. Over the decades, at least 3 people have reportedly disappeared while exploring Devil's Canyon. One was a geologist with a university research team in the 1980s. He left camp early one morning to take measurements and never returned. His equipment was later found at the edge of the spring, but no sign of him, no tracks, no evidence of struggle. The spring's depth, while never fully measured, is believed to be no more than 10 feet. Divers found nothing. Another disappearance occurred in 1997, involving a solo hiker from Nevada. His last known message, left on a voicemail before service cut out, simply said, "I found it, it's real." He, too, was never found. Is the boiling spring of Devil's Canyon, a rare but natural phenomenon, still poorly understood? A geological anomaly that stirs our fears because of its isolation and mystery? Or is it something more? A sacred site? A trapdoor into Earth's deeper recesses? A place where time and perhaps reality fractures? Even today, the spring remains remote, largely unmarked, avoided by most locals. Those who venture there often leave with more questions than answers. Some say it hums at night. Others say it watches. And so the mystery endures. Why does this spring defy science? Why do those who visit feel changed, or in some cases never return? And perhaps most hauntingly of all, what if anything lies beneath those quietly roiling waters? What waits in the boiling heart of Devil's Canyon? As we move on from the unnerving silence of Devil's Canyon, the Wild West offers yet another riddle. One forged not in boiling earth, but in glittering gold. Deep in the wooded highlands of Northern California, where mist lingers low over pine-covered ridges and narrow streams rush with snowmelt, lies a place both treasured and feared. Cursed Creek. At first glance, the creek appears ordinary. Its water glides over polished stones, surrounded by tangled brush and towering Douglas firs. But listen long enough, and you'll hear the hush of locals who avoid the area, even now, who speak of sudden misfortunes and a strange heaviness that settles over the land. For nestled in this quiet watercourse is one of the strangest legends of the western frontier, the tale of the cursed Creek Nugget. The story begins, as many gold rush tales do, in the fevered year of 1851. Miners from across the country, and as far as China, Chile, and Europe, poured into the Sierra foothills, driven by the promise of riches pulled from rivers and mountains. One such prospector, a man named Elias Thorne, arrived in what was then called Constance Hollow, a narrow ravine known for its promising quartz veins and cold, fast-moving waters. According to Thorne's own journal, now preserved in a regional historical archive, he had been panning alone one morning when he noticed a strange glint in the creek bed, larger and brighter than any flake he'd found before. He reached into the icy current and pulled free a nugget the size of a clenched fist. Later, measured at over 14 pounds, the nugget was unusually dense and smooth, with an oddly metallic sheen that did not match typical placer gold. Its surface was etched with fine, curling patterns Thorne could not explain. He took it as a sign of fortune. Others would see it differently. Within a week of finding the nugget, Thorne's mule went lame. Days later, his tent caught fire in the night, destroying most of his supplies. Fellow miners reported that his once jovial demeanor turned withdrawn and erratic. Then, on the 10th day, he vanished. His body was never found. The nugget, however, remained. It passed from hand to hand like a cursed inheritance. The next known owner was a saloon keeper named Doyle Sheehan, who bought the nugget from a trader in nearby Nevada City. Within months, Sheehan's business burned to the ground in a suspicious blaze. He survived, but lost everything. After that, the nugget passed to a banker, who drowned under mysterious circumstances, then a gambler, who was shot in a dispute over a card game. Each story followed the same rhythm. The nugget appears, a misfortune follows, and the nugget moves on. Eventually, it was given a name, the Cursed Creek Nugget. Skeptics, of course, dismiss the tale as coincidence or frontier superstition. In the 19th century, gold drove men to madness. Accidents were common, and violence was part of the fabric of life. Yet the specificity of the nugget's trail, the consistency of tragedy, raises uncomfortable questions. Could it have been a self-fulfilling prophecy, a psychological burden passed along with the gold, or could something more be at play? Some researchers have noted that Thorne's original description of the nugget's unusual appearance, its high density, dark sheen, and strange markings, does not match typical placer gold. Metallurgists who examined photographs of what may have been the nugget noted the possibility of an alloy, perhaps gold laced with iridium or another rare element. One theory even suggests that the nugget could have originated from a meteorite fragment, altered by centuries underground. If true, could its composition have triggered environmental effects, perhaps even neurological ones? Others point to the markings on its surface. Though no complete record of them exists today, a 1906 article from the Placerville Sentinel claimed the designs bore resemblance to symbols used by the Maidu people, an indigenous group with deep roots in the region. Maidu oral traditions do contain stories of spirit stones and objects imbued with powerful forces, both good and malevolent. Could the nugget have been something sacred, removed from where it was never meant to be disturbed? Fringe theories venture even further. Some claim the nugget is not natural at all, but an artifact, perhaps from a forgotten civilization, or something even older. A few connect it to legends of ancient giants who mined the earth before man, stories whispered in isolated logging camps or recorded in obscure 19th century pamphlets. While no archaeological evidence supports these ideas, they persist, like the memory of the nugget itself. In 1949, a prospector named Henry Winslow claimed to have rediscovered the nugget, buried in a rusted strongbox hidden beneath a collapsed cabin near Cursed Creek. He brought it to a museum in Sacramento, where it was briefly displayed before disappearing again, allegedly stolen in a break-in. The theft was never solved, and no photographs of the nugget during that brief appearance survive, though newspaper accounts describe it in familiar terms: unnaturally smooth, impossibly heavy, and etched with curling lines like vines or flames. If the nugget still exists, its location is unknown. Some believe it was melted down, its curse, they say, flowing into any object made with its gold. Others claim it rests beneath the waters of Cursed Creek once more, waiting. But perhaps the real mystery isn't whether the curse is real. Perhaps the real question is what the nugget was, and why those who touched it seemed drawn to ruin. Is it merely a legend built from the chaos of the gold rush? A cautionary tale wrapped in coincidence? Or is it something far older than the frontier itself? Something the land still remembers, even if we do not. In the filtered light of the forest, where the stream still murmurs and the rocks still gleam faintly beneath the surface, the mystery endures. Quiet, waiting, watching. So ask yourself, if you were to see a glint of gold in those waters today, would you reach for it? Or would you remember what was left behind, and what was never fully explained? From gold-laced curses buried in woodland streams, we journey now into the arid silence of the high desert, where stone holds memory, and some scars never seem to heal. In the red rock country of the Four Corners region, amid the vast mesas and buttes that rise like ancient sentinels over the sandstone plains, there lies a curious formation known simply as the Bleeding Rock. Set atop a windswept mesa in northwestern New Mexico, not far from the borders of Navajo and Ute lands, this particular stone stands out from the rust-colored terrain. It's not its size or shape that sets it apart, but the deep crimson stains that seem to seep from within it. Rivulets of red that appear after rain, trailing down the stone face like blood. To those who pass through the area, hikers, ranchers, even geologists, the sight is disquieting. In a landscape already steeped in legend, the Bleeding Rock is a focal point of whispered stories and uneasy glances. Its surface, weathered by wind and time, appears ordinary from a distance. But up close, the stains are unmistakable, iron-rich, perhaps, but strangely vibrant, as if freshly spilled. Local lore stretches back centuries. According to some oral traditions of the Diné, Navajo, the mesa was once the site of a great battle between spiritual beings, where a guardian was slain and its lifeblood sank into the stone. Others say the rock weeps for injustices long buried. Massacres, betrayals, ancient sorrows etched into the earth itself. Western accounts begin in the 1860s. A cavalry patrol, scouting the territory during a particularly harsh season, camped near the mesa. In a letter later recovered from the personal effects of a lieutenant, the soldier described a rock that bleeds in the morning dew, and noted the unease among his men. They moved on quickly, though no formal record of the site was made until the 1890s, when a survey team from the U.S. Geological Survey visited the region. One of the geologists noted the presence of unusual oxidation along the rock's surface. Deep crimson veining inconsistent with the surrounding mineral content, he wrote, yet no follow-up analysis was ever published. Geologists today point to hematite, an iron oxide common in desert environments, as the likely cause of the staining. When rainwater interacts with iron-rich layers in the stone, it can produce a reddish runoff that stains the rock's surface. A logical explanation, and a likely one. And yet, something about this particular site resists easy classification. For one, the staining pattern doesn't seem to fade. Unlike other oxidized formations, which typically show gradual erosion or change over time, the red marks on the bleeding rock remain sharp and well-defined, even after decades. Locals say they refresh after every storm, as if replenished. And then there's the water itself. In a 1977 field report, now archived at the University of New Mexico, a graduate student collected runoff samples from the stone following a seasonal rain. According to his notes, the water contained unusually high levels of organic compounds, inconsistent with local rainfall or groundwater sources. Unfortunately, the report was never peer-reviewed, and the original samples were reportedly lost in a laboratory move a few years later. Still, the question lingers. What gives the bleeding rock its persistent, unsettling color? And why does it stir such unease in those who encounter it? Beyond the physical anomaly, there are the stories, some stranger than others. Hikers have reported feelings of dizziness or disorientation when standing too close to the rock. One local guide described an overwhelming pressure in the chest that lifted only when he backed away. A photographer who attempted to document the site in the early 2000s claimed his digital files were corrupted, though his camera functioned normally before and after visiting the Mesa. The Ute and Navajo traditions surrounding the site offer deeper, if more symbolic, explanations. Some believe the rock serves as a spiritual wound, a physical reminder of an ancient wrongdoing never set right. One Navajo elder, interviewed in a 1995 oral history project, called it the stone that remembers. She spoke of a place where spirits linger in pain and where the earth itself bleeds in mourning. Others link the site to more recent history. In the mid-19th century, as tensions escalated between settlers and indigenous communities, scattered conflicts erupted across the region. One such incident, largely forgotten by mainstream accounts, allegedly occurred near the Mesa. A small group of Diné families were said to have been ambushed while seeking shelter from a storm. The details remain murky, but some researchers believe the rock's name, Bleeding Mesa, may have originated not from geology, but from this violent past. Could the stains then be less about science and more about memory? A symbolic bleeding, etched not in blood, but in the land's refusal to forget. More speculative theories suggest entirely different origins. Some claim the rock is meteorite-borne, its core composition unlike any other in the region, giving it unique chemical properties. A few point to electromagnetic anomalies in the area, compass needles drifting off true north, batteries depleting faster than expected. Though no rigorous studies have confirmed such anomalies, they remain part of the site's growing mythology. And then, there are those who speak of watchers, figures seen near the rock at dusk, motionless silhouettes that vanish when approached. Trick of the light, a product of the Mesa's long shadows and harsh contours, or something else. Like many Western mysteries, the Bleeding Rock sits at the crossroads of science, history, and legend. Each path offers fragments of understanding, yet none completes the picture. It is an object both physical and symbolic, real in form, but elusive in meaning. Why does it bleed? What does it remember? And what, if anything, is it still trying to tell us? In a land shaped by erosion and time, where so much has been lost to wind and silence, the Bleeding Rock remains, unchanging, unyielding, and unanswered. A red-stained question written in stone, waiting for someone to read between the lines. From the crimson-streaked stones of the Four Corners region, where legends seem etched into the landscape itself, we journey eastward, into a terrain no less stark, no less silent. It is a land of horizons so vast they seem to swallow time. Here, beneath a sky that stretches unbroken for miles, lies the Llano Estacado, the Staked Plains. Covering much of eastern New Mexico and northwestern Texas, the Llano Estacado is an immense, elevated plateau. Flat, dry, and windswept, it is a place where distances deceive, and landmarks are few. In the 19th century, travelers often described the region as the Sea of Grass, where heat shimmered like water and the line between land and sky blurred. For centuries, indigenous peoples knew its contours intimately. To the Comanche and Kiowa, it was both homeland and hunting ground, a place of ambushes, survival, and memory. It was into this unforgiving land, in the final years of Reconstruction, that a detachment of U.S. cavalry known as the Buffalo Soldiers rode and vanished. The Buffalo Soldiers were African-American troops, most often assigned to the harshest frontier posts. They were veterans of the Civil War, freedmen seeking purpose, and newly enlisted men determined to earn respect in a divided and often hostile nation. Formed in 1866, the 9th and 10th Cavalry regiments were frequently tasked with patrolling remote territories, escorting settlers, and engaging in conflicts with native tribes resisting the spread of U.S. military presence. According to the official record, in July of 1877, a detachment of approximately 25 men from the 10th Cavalry left Fort Concho, Texas, headed northwest. Their mission? To locate a group of horse thieves believed to be operating near the Canadian River. Led by Sergeant Isaiah Banks, a decorated veteran, the patrol was expected to return within 2 weeks, but they never did. No confirmed trace of them was ever found. At first, it was assumed they had been ambushed, perhaps by Comanche or Apache warriors still resisting forced relocation. The Llano Estacado was notorious for sudden raids and guerrilla-style warfare. Yet, search parties dispatched from multiple forts failed to recover any signs of conflict. No blood, no spent cartridges, no broken gear, no graves, just silence. The only physical clue came weeks later, when a rancher near Palo Duro Canyon discovered several cavalry horses wandering untethered, saddles still in place, canteens full, but no riders in sight. The animals were confirmed to be from the missing unit. The discovery only deepened the mystery. What happened to Sergeant Banks and his men? Military records refer to the incident only briefly, noting loss of patrol in hostile territory, presumed casualties. Some historians believe the incident was downplayed due to the racial makeup of the unit and the embarrassment it posed to the Army. Others suggest that the harsh terrain and limited resources made a full investigation impossible. But over time, stories began to emerge, accounts that defied conventional explanations. Local folklore tells of ghost riders seen on the plains near Caprock Escarpment, galloping at dusk in complete silence, the glint of brass buttons catching the dying light before fading into nothing. Campers have reported hearing phantom hoofbeats in the night, followed by the low murmur of voices speaking an old-fashioned cadence. Even more intriguingly, a 1934 account from a geologist working in the region mentioned stumbling across a set of weathered boots, half buried in caliche soil, containing bones remarkably preserved by the arid climate. Nearby were rusted fragments of what appeared to be a Springfield rifle and a brass U.S. military belt buckle, identified tentatively as late 19th century. But before a proper excavation could take place, a flash flood swept through the area, burying the site once more under layers of debris and clay. Then there's the matter of the so-called Journal of Sergeant Banks, said to have surfaced in a private estate sale in Oklahoma in the 1970s. The journal, if authentic, details strange occurrences in the days following the patrol's departure. Unseasonal cold snaps, uncanny echoes across the prairie, and an encounter with what Banks cryptically described as the Watchers on the Ridge. The final entry ends abruptly. They are not men. They do not ride, yet they follow. The journal's authenticity remains disputed. Some claim it was a fabrication designed to sell at auction. Others believe it was destroyed before experts could examine it. Skeptics point to more grounded possibilities. Heat exhaustion, dehydration, or simply getting lost in the endless, featureless terrain could have doomed the patrol. Dust storms in the Llano Estacado can arise suddenly, blinding even seasoned scouts. A single navigational error could strand an entire unit without water, especially in the brutal summer heat. But for every logical explanation, there remains a hole in the record. An unanswered question, a piece missing from the map. Why was there no sign of struggle? Why did the horses return fully equipped? And how do we account for the persistent sightings, scattered over more than a century, of riders that no longer belong to the living? Even today, long-haul truckers and ranch hands occasionally speak of distant figures on horseback that vanish before they can be approached. Stories, yes, but stories that linger, much like the wind that never seems to rest across the plateau. Could the Llano Estacado itself be the key? There are places on this earth where memory lives in the land, where history clings to the rocks, the soil, and the wind. The Buffalo Soldiers of the vanished patrol left behind no graves, no confirmed remains, and no formal memorial. But perhaps their presence endures in another way, etched invisibly into the terrain they once crossed, into the mystery they became part of. And so we ask, what happened on that silent expanse in the summer of 1877? Were these soldiers lost to misfortune, or to something more elusive, something that moves just beyond the reach of history? The Llano Estacado offers no answers, only space and silence, and the faint, unshakable sense that someone or something was watching, and perhaps still is. From the empty reaches of the Llano Estacado, where hoofbeats vanish into legend and ghost riders cross unseen horizons, we now turn to a mystery of ink, pages, and silence, one that begins not on the open plains, but in the cramped, dust-scented corners of a Texas law office, and ends in vanishing ink. El Paso, Texas. The year was 1895, a border town on the edge of law and lawlessness, where railroads clashed with desert and reputations were forged at the end of a barrel. Here, in a small office above a saloon on San Antonio Street, sat one of the most infamous men ever to ride through the American West, John Wesley Hardin. A gunman, a gambler, a former schoolteacher, and by many accounts a cold-blooded killer, Hardin had walked a tightrope between outlaw and folk hero for decades. He claimed to have killed more than 40 men, some say fewer, others more. His life was one of contradiction. Part scholar, part sociopath. A man of deep self-justification and sudden violence. But in his final years, it seems he turned to something more reflective. Writing. Hardin, after serving 17 years in prison for murder, had emerged in 1894 with something unusual for a man of his reputation, a desire to tell his side of the story. He began writing a memoir, but more importantly, he is believed to have kept a personal diary, one that delved beyond the embellished tales of the saloons and newspapers, into the unfiltered thoughts of a man shaped by war, vengeance, and the shifting moral landscape of the frontier. The diary, according to accounts from his common-law wife and his legal associate, was always with him, bound in dark leather, worn at the edges, and locked away when not in use. It reportedly contained entries on the deaths he had caused, his time in prison, his dreams, and his deep mistrust of those around him. One entry, recalled in a second-hand letter years later, allegedly read, "History lies. I've seen it lie, but these pages do not." And then, after his dramatic shooting death in the Acme Saloon on August 19, 1895, the diary disappeared. Witnesses confirmed that Hardin had the journal in his office that very afternoon, having reportedly written in it just hours before he was killed. But when officials arrived to catalog his effects, it was nowhere to be found. His revolver, his boots, even his pocket watch were accounted for. But of the leather-bound diary, not a trace. How could a personal item so close to him vanish in a matter of hours? Some believe it was taken by law enforcement, confiscated and hidden away, possibly due to the names it mentioned. Hardin was known to associate with Texas Rangers, politicians, and even high-ranking members of the judiciary. Could the diary have contained secrets too dangerous to make public? Others suggest the diary was stolen by a rival or a former friend, someone who feared exposure or saw value in possessing such a relic. One theory points to a fellow gambler who was seen entering Hardin's office shortly after the shooting, only to leave town the next day. No charges were filed, no questions answered. Then there's the theory that it was destroyed, burned by a family member or partner who feared what it might reveal. Hardin's writings were said to swing between raw confession and barely veiled threats. If the pages contained names, dates, and places tied to unsolved killings, retribution might not have died with the man himself. The few fragments that survive do little to clarify the matter. In 1907, a rare book collector in San Antonio claimed to have seen 2 pages of what he believed were Hardin's journal, offered to him anonymously and quickly withdrawn. One page reportedly included a cryptic reference to the gold buried where the preacher fell, possibly alluding to a still unsolved robbery in central Texas. The second, more chilling, read only, "They think I forget, but I never forget." If authentic, the pages would be among the only first-hand glimpses into Hardin's internal world, a world shaped not only by violence, but also by an obsessive need to control the narrative. Historians have long debated whether the diary ever existed at all. Hardin's autobiography, published posthumously in 1896 by his family, contains no direct excerpts from such a journal, only his legal memoir, largely defensive in tone. Skeptics argue that the diary was merely a local legend, inflated by rumor and fed by the mystique surrounding his death. But others are not so quick to dismiss it. In 1963, a safe was uncovered during the renovation of a long-abandoned building near Hardin's former law office. Inside were fragments of personal effects, handwritten notes, poker chips, an old belt buckle, but no diary. And yet, among the scraps, one item stood out. A faded envelope marked simply W.H. Private. Its contents were never disclosed publicly, and the envelope's current location is unknown. What, if anything, lies within those missing pages? Were they the ramblings of a fading legend, desperate to justify his sins, or something more? Could the diary offer insights into the hidden connections between lawmen and outlaws, into the quiet agreements that held the West together, or tore it apart? And what does it mean that so many have sought it, yet none have found it? Perhaps the answer lies not in what was written, but in what someone didn't want to be read. As with so many mysteries of the American frontier, the disappearance of John Wesley Hardin's diary blurs the line between fact and folklore. A document that may, or may not, have existed, said to contain truths too dangerous for daylight, and lost in the shadows of a saloon shooting that ended one life, but began a legend. So we're left with only questions. Was the diary ever real? If so, who has it now? And if the pages were opened today, what secrets of the Wild West might come spilling out into the light? From the cryptic absence of a diary, pages lost to time or perhaps hidden by design, we now turn our gaze southward, across the jagged frontier where the United States meets the rugged heartland of northern Mexico. Here, nestled within the crumpled spine of the continent, lie the Sierra Madre Mountains. Towering and treacherous, these peaks have long been a refuge for those fleeing civilization, and a graveyard for those who pursued them. The Sierra Madre Occidental stretches like a fortress across western Mexico, its ridges folded in complex layers of pine forest, crumbling cliffs, and canyons so deep they seem to lead out of this world. In the late 19th century, much of this land remained uncharted by U.S. forces, especially in the far northern edges of Chihuahua, where folklore and fact are often indistinguishable. It was into this shadowed landscape, in the winter of 1883, that a small U.S. cavalry patrol rode and never returned. Official records from the War Department indicate that a detachment of 14 men from the 4th Cavalry, under the command of Lieutenant Stephen Newhall, crossed the Rio Grande from Fort Davis, Texas, in pursuit of a group of Apache raiders believed to have stolen livestock and killed several ranchers near the border. Such cross-border incursions were not uncommon in those years, and although controversial, they were often carried out under tacit approval, especially in the lawless terrain where political borders were more conceptual than real. The patrol was expected to follow a known route used by Apache scouts, a trail that wound through the Cañón del Cobre and ascended into the upper reaches of the Sierra Madre. Newhall was experienced, as were his scouts. Their mission, while dangerous, was routine by frontier standards. They carried 3 weeks of supplies, fresh mounts, and communication orders to check in at a Mexican garrison in Guachochi by the 10th day. They never arrived. When no word came after 2 weeks, a secondary force was dispatched, but by the time they reached the edge of the Sierra Madre, snowfall and dense fog made passage impossible. Eventually, the search was abandoned until spring. What they found months later only deepened the mystery. Scattered at the edge of a ravine, some 40 miles southeast of the border, were fragments of uniform cloth, several shell casings, and a rusted saber. One horse was found alive but malnourished. Another was found dead at the base of the cliff, its reins tangled in a thorn bush. But there were no bodies, no sign of an engagement, no footprints leading away. The patrol had simply vanished. Military authorities speculated that the men were ambushed and their bodies carried off or hidden by the attackers. Yet, no Apache group operating in the region ever claimed responsibility. In fact, several Apache sources, decades later, insisted that no such confrontation occurred and that the Americans were never seen within the territory at all. So, what happened to Lieutenant Newhall's patrol? Some historians suggest the men may have been victims of natural disaster, an avalanche, perhaps, or a flash flood in the canyons. The Sierra Madre is prone to sudden environmental shifts, and a misstep on a narrow trail could be fatal, but such an event would likely have left more evidence. Skeletal remains, scattered gear, something. Others argue the patrol may have deserted, either mutiny or mass defection, but the men chosen for this mission were hand-picked veterans, and none had a known history of insubordination. Their service records were clean. Their families waited, unanswered, for decades. Then there are the stranger theories. In the 1930s, a Mexican trapper claimed to have stumbled upon a cave high in the mountains, where he found rusted rifles stacked in a pile, U.S. military insignia, and, most haunting of all, a line of skulls set neatly along a stone shelf. No formal investigation was ever conducted. The man disappeared shortly after making his report to local officials. In the 1950s, a retired anthropologist working near Batopilas reportedly uncovered a rusted belt buckle and a cavalry button buried in the dirt floor of a remote Tarahumara village. When questioned, the local elders told him the items had always been there, belonging to the men who came but did not leave. No bones were found, and no one offered further explanation. More speculative accounts suggest something older at work. The Sierra Madre has long been steeped in supernatural lore. The Tarahumara speak of spirits that guard the high places, warning outsiders to stay away. Some legends speak of Los Vigilantes sin Sombra, the Watchers without shadows, beings that appear before misfortune and who walk silently between trees. Could Newhall's patrol have encountered something beyond human? Or did they fall prey to human hands, skilled in making bodies disappear? Even the Mexican military, according to a declassified memo from 1901, briefly considered the possibility that Newhall's patrol had been captured, not killed, and assimilated into an isolated community deep in the Sierra. A few anecdotal reports over the decades mentioned tall, light-eyed men living among the Tarahumara, speaking a broken, archaic form of English. But no evidence has ever emerged to support these claims. What is known, however, is that no trace of the soldiers' remains, journals, or weapons has ever been officially recovered. The incident remains one of the few unsolved disappearances in U.S. military frontier history. Why has this case remained so little known? Why was the official report quietly shelved and never followed up with a full inquiry? And who, if anyone, stands to gain from its continued obscurity? In a region where mountains eat sound and fog swallows movement, it's easy for history to vanish. The Sierra Madre does not give up its secrets easily, and perhaps that's the point. More than 140 years later, no monument marks the vanished patrol's passage. No grave lists their names. Only the land remains, vast, indifferent, and whispering. So we're left to wonder, did the Sierra Madre take them? Or is someone still hiding what really happened, high in those silent canyons where the border fades and the past never quite stays buried? As the echoes of the lost cavalry patrol fade into the mountain wind, our path takes us northwest, into a land of harsher sun, colder nights, and secrets buried beneath stone and sagebrush. Nevada, a place of paradoxes, vast and silent, yet rich with stories whispered through dry winds and brittle soil. Here, among the lonely canyons and forgotten trails of the Great Basin Desert, lies another tale, less violent perhaps, but no less confounding. It is a story of gold, and not just any gold, but Mormon gold, hidden, guarded, or perhaps never truly there, a treasure whose truth is as elusive as the men said to have buried it. The terrain where this mystery unfolds is stark, beautiful, and punishing. Towering rock formations cast long shadows over arid plains where the only sound is the rustle of wind through desert grass. Near the remote edges of what is now known as the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest, local folklore speaks of hidden caves, marked stones, and strange lights that flicker in the distance on moonless nights. But the story begins not in Nevada, but in Utah territory. The year was 1857. The United States government, increasingly wary of Brigham Young's autonomous governance and the growing power of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, prepared to send a large federal force westward, an event now known as the Utah War. Though a peaceful resolution was eventually negotiated, the Mormons feared that open conflict was inevitable. Brigham Young ordered his followers to prepare, to hide resources, scatter livestock, and, crucially, protect church assets. According to church records and local legends, vast amounts of gold, much of it in tithing and donations, had been collected by the saints over the years. Some of it reportedly minted into coins in Salt Lake City, but as federal troops advanced, a decision was made. A portion of this treasure was to be hidden, far from prying eyes in the desolate safety of Nevada's wilderness. But where exactly? Some versions of the tale point to a small caravan of faithful men, tasked with transporting the gold under cover of darkness. They crossed west into the high desert, accompanied by scouts familiar with Paiute trails and mountain passes. Their instructions were simple: bury the treasure and leave signs that only the faithful could interpret. The men succeeded, and then vanished. No official record confirms the return of the group. No bodies were found. Some believe they were ambushed by bandits. Others suggest they were executed by their own leaders to protect the location of the hoard. A darker version claims the gold was cursed from the beginning, and that the men were driven mad by their burden, scattering into the desert to die alone. Years passed. The Civil War came and went. The story of the Mormon gold slowly faded into the background noise of frontier myth, but it never disappeared entirely. In the 1890s, a prospector named Abner Whipple claimed to have found unusual stone carvings in a canyon near Austin, Nevada. Symbols that resembled the Deseret alphabet, a short-lived script developed by the early Mormon Church. He followed the trail to a cave marked with a beehive symbol, another known Mormon emblem. But when he returned with others, the entrance had collapsed. He died before it could be excavated. In 1913, an old map surfaced in Ely, showing a route west from Salt Lake City into Nevada, marked with cryptic notes: circle of stone, guardian pine, and the word tithing. The map changed hands several times, sold among collectors, historians, and treasure hunters. By the 1950s, it had vanished into a private archive. Could there really be a buried Mormon treasury somewhere in the wilds of Nevada? Skeptics argue that the story is a blend of wishful thinking and pioneer paranoia. No concrete evidence, no coins, no sealed vault, no verified journal has ever been uncovered. The church has repeatedly denied any knowledge of such a hoard. Yet, even today, rumors persist. In the spring of 1986, a park ranger reported seeing a group of men in period-style clothing moving through a remote section of the forest, on horseback, carrying long bundles wrapped in canvas. When he returned to investigate, he found hoofprints that ended abruptly at a dry creek bed. No campfires, no trash, no signs of modern gear. In 1997, a metal detectorist exploring a dry wash near Battle Mountain uncovered a strange, handmade coin bearing the image of a beehive and the inscription, "Holiness to the Lord." Experts believe it was minted in Salt Lake City in the mid-1800s, yet no record exists of that exact design. Were these just relics scattered by settlers? Or were they breadcrumbs from a much larger, carefully concealed operation? More fringe theories suggest the gold may have been used to fund secretive ventures during the westward expansion, covert Mormon settlements, or even early infrastructure projects meant to ensure church influence in the growing territory. Others propose that the treasure was never intended to be found, hidden as a kind of sacred reserve to be uncovered only when divine revelation allowed. Still, others hint at supernatural protection. Stories tell of travelers drawn to a strange glow in the hills, only to lose their way in the terrain. Compasses spinning, footsteps circling back, whispers in the dark, the presence of something ancient watching. Whatever the truth, the mystery remains. In a state pockmarked with ghost towns, silver dreams, and lost hopes, the story of the lost Mormon gold endures like the desert itself, unforgiving, stubborn, and eternal. So we ask as the wind brushes through the juniper trees and the rocks cast long evening shadows, was there truly a treasure carried into the Nevada wilderness to protect it from government hands? If so, who buried it? And more hauntingly, why has it never been found? Perhaps it lies there still, waiting in silence beneath the sagebrush, guarded not just by secrecy but by something deeper, something that doesn't want to be uncovered. As whispers of lost gold dissolve into the dry desert winds, the journey carries us south, toward a town where time lingers, faded but watchful. Here, nestled against the rugged Organ Mountains in southern New Mexico, lies the historic village of Mesilla. Its adobe walls glow honey gold in the late sun, and the Spanish colonial architecture casts long, soft shadows across the plaza. The air is still. The streets are quiet, but if you listen closely, some say the myrtles speak. Twisting up from the dry earth, the myrtle trees in Mesilla are neither grand nor unusual at first glance. Their gnarled limbs stretch low and wide, leaves dense and dark even in summer. But among the oldest trees, those lining the edge of La Posta Road and surrounding the town's oldest cemetery, a strange stillness seems to settle. Locals call them the haunted myrtles. At night, these trees take on a different presence. Under the light of a waning moon, their silhouettes become more than branches. Some resemble figures, cloaked and hunched. Others appear to reach for one another, or for those who pass beneath. But are these just tricks of the desert light, or remnants of something more? Mesilla's roots reach deep into the 19th century, when it was a pivotal stop along the Butterfield Overland Trail and a crossroads between the Old West and the shifting territories of Mexico. The town has seen invasions, gunfights, political intrigue, and executions. It is a place that has witnessed death more than its share. During the Civil War, Confederate and Union troops clashed for control of the region. Bodies filled the nearby graveyards. Rumors persist of summary executions carried out beneath the shade of the myrtle trees, sometimes in secret, sometimes in spectacle. One particularly chilling account, published in a regional paper in 1871, tells of a Union deserter hung beneath a tree near the edge of the town square, his body left swinging through the night as a warning. Could that tree still be standing? Could that moment have imprinted something into the soil or the wood? As time passed, the myrtles grew thicker, deeper rooted, and the stories began. By the early 20th century, local children were warned not to linger near the trees after dusk. Livestock reportedly avoided certain paths lined with myrtles, balking or going stiff-legged with fear. A schoolteacher in the 1930s wrote in her journal of seeing a pale child standing beneath a tree on her walk home. When she approached, the figure vanished. In more recent decades, reports have grown stranger still. Several Mesilla residents, many of them unconnected, have claimed to hear whispering beneath the trees on windless nights. Not the rustle of leaves, but voices, indistinct, close, and circling. Some describe the sound as prayer. Others say it resembles weeping. One longtime rancher, in an interview from 1992, recounted a night when he parked near the cemetery after dark and saw a figure in 19th century military garb pacing beneath a tree, only to blink and find the area empty. No photographs have captured anything definitive. No recordings have clearly picked up the whispers. Yet the stories persist. What makes this more than local folklore is the consistency of the descriptions. The same trees, the same locations, the same odd feelings of being watched or followed or spoken to. And in nearly every account, those involved have nothing to gain. They are not tourists or thrill seekers, but teachers, veterans, business owners. ordinary people who stumbled into something they could not explain. Skeptics point to natural causes. The shape of the trees, they argue, creates acoustic illusions. Desert air can amplify sounds from miles away. Others blame sleep deprivation, suggestion, or cultural storytelling passed through generations. It's true, Mesilla is a town steeped in oral tradition. Its very identity is woven from legend and memory, but there are things harder to dismiss. In 2006, a construction crew working near a line of Myrtles unearthed human remains, bones, weathered buttons, and the rusted outline of a saber. No record could be found of any burial in that location. Historians suggested the body might date back to the Civil War era, though definitive identification was never made. The remains were quietly reinterred, but afterward, workers reported equipment malfunctioning near the same tree line. One reported hearing a woman humming during his lunch break, when no one else was present. Others cite the botanical oddity that several of the oldest myrtles in Mesilla seem to thrive in unusually poor soil, growing larger and denser than their counterparts across town. Could something in the soil be feeding them? Something more than nutrients? Some fringe researchers have floated the idea of ley lines, energy paths believed to run beneath sacred or spiritually active places, converging beneath Mesilla. One amateur investigator claimed electromagnetic readings near the haunted Myrtles fluctuated dramatically compared to baseline desert levels. While mainstream science offers no support for such theories, the pattern of anomalies adds a curious layer to the already compelling tale. Still, there is no definitive proof. Only layers of history, unearthed and reburied, surrounded by trees whose roots drink deeply from the past. The question lingers. Are the haunted Myrtles of Mesilla simply living witnesses to old tragedies, growing where blood once spilled and secrets were whispered? Or do they carry something more? Is it memory that lives in these trees, or something that remembers us? As the breeze dies down and the moonlight catches the curve of an ancient trunk, you may find yourself wondering, if you stood beneath those branches, alone after midnight, what would you hear? And more importantly, would it be whispering to you or warning you to leave? From the shadowed streets of Mesilla to the haunting roots of its whispering myrtles, we now travel northwest, into the high desert of the Four Corners region. Here, straddling the boundary between Navajo and Ute lands, rises a sandstone plateau cloaked in legend and silence, Skinwalker Mesa. The mesa stretches across the Utah wilderness like the spine of an ancient creature, its jagged edges weathered by time and wind. During the day, it is a stark monument, sun-bleached, still, and seemingly empty. But when night falls, the land breathes differently. Stars scatter across the heavens in impossible clarity, the vastness of the sky only broken by the looming presence of the mesa itself. And some say that in that darkness, when no vehicle is near, when the air is utterly still, lights begin to move. Not headlights, not campfires, but spheres. Orbs, pale bluish-white glows that float above the earth. Sometimes darting, sometimes hovering. The ghost lights of Skinwalker Mesa. Locals describe them as silent, eerily so. They appear in pairs or clusters, often out of nowhere, weaving over ridgelines and then vanishing, as if pulled back into the rock itself. For generations, these lights have been whispered about in hushed tones. Ranchers speak of them from a distance. Tribal elders warn against following them, and researchers, well, they can't explain them. Historically, the area has long been considered sacred, mysterious, and, by some accounts, dangerous. The Ute people, in particular, have a deep-rooted belief that the mesa harbors powerful energies and entities. Oral traditions speak of a curse placed upon the land following a long conflict with the Navajo, in which dark medicine, Skinwalker magic, was invoked. Whether interpreted as folklore or warning, this lore has never been taken lightly by those who live near the Mesa's shadow. But the lights? They remain one of the Mesa's most persistent puzzles. The first documented mention by Western settlers dates to the early 20th century, when a ranching family wrote of floating stars over the cliffs in a letter archived by the Utah Historical Society. In the 1960s and 70s, a handful of amateur astronomers and hikers reported seeing what they called cold flares, lights that moved in unison without making a sound. Some were convinced they were observing unknown aerial technology. Others insisted it was a mirage caused by desert heat, but the sightings continued. Then, in the 1990s, Skinwalker Mesa came to national attention thanks to a series of events surrounding the nearby Sherman Ranch, later dubbed Skinwalker Ranch in popular media. The Shermans, hardworking cattle ranchers, reported strange animal mutilations, poltergeist-like activity, and, notably, recurring appearances of orb-like lights. These lights, they claimed, could not be chased or captured. They would respond, at times almost playfully, to human attention, weaving through the trees or zipping across the sky at speeds no drone or aircraft could match. Skeptics were quick to dismiss the accounts. Atmospheric anomalies, they said. Electromagnetic interference. Ball lightning. The desert, after all, is a strange place, a land of illusions and misperceptions. But what, then, explains the precision? The intelligence some observers feel the lights display? How do we explain their ability to move against wind currents? To stop and start on a dime? To approach and then disappear without a sound? In 1996, the property was purchased by a private research entity funded by aerospace entrepreneur Robert Bigelow, who launched a series of confidential scientific investigations into the area. While much of the research remains under wraps, leaked reports and later interviews suggest that the lights were consistently observed, sometimes on infrared or thermal imaging, often outside the visible spectrum of human sight. One physicist associated with the project described the phenomenon as structured, responsive, and possibly non-natural. Others were less committal, pointing instead to naturally occurring plasma or subterranean seismic activity that could, under rare conditions, generate ionized light. But even those explanations leave questions unanswered. Why do the lights appear only in certain parts of the mesa? Why are they often seen during moments of high emotional tension, or just before incidents involving animals or equipment? And perhaps most curiously, why do those who observe them up close often report deep unease, disorientation, or sudden nausea? There are fringe theories, of course. Some suggest the lights are not lights at all, but manifestations, projections, of something beyond our comprehension. Others claim they are sentinels, remnants of ancient energy systems, or even echoes from another time or dimension bleeding into ours. While these ideas are speculative at best, what's clear is that the lights have defied consistent, replicable study. Government interest, too, has not gone unnoticed. In recent years, a renewed focus on unidentified aerial phenomena has brought attention back to the mesa and its surrounding mysteries. Still, the lights persist. Travelers continue to glimpse them, especially those who spend nights near the ridges or watch the mesa from a respectful distance. Some try to capture them with cameras. Most fail. Others dismiss them until they see them for themselves. And some, particularly local tribespeople, believe the lights are not meant to be explained. They are part of something older, something the land remembers, and something that resists interference. So, what are the ghost lights of Skinwalker Mesa? An unknown natural phenomenon, experimental technology, spirits, something far older than we can imagine. The mesa offers no answers, only silence, and light, flickering, drifting, watching, then gone. And in that silence, one can't help but wonder, are we witnessing the last remnants of a forgotten energy? Or is the Mesa revealing just enough to remind us how little we truly understand? From the flickering orbs above Skinwalker Mesa, we descend southward, tracing the curve of the Rio Grande, a river whose name translates as the Big River, and whose presence has defined borders, sustained civilizations, and in some cases, hidden secrets. It is along one remote stretch of this ancient waterway, near the rugged canyons of West Texas, where one of the strangest tales of the American frontier quietly lingers, the story of the Vanishing Bridge. The landscape here is stark and humbling. Sun-scorched limestone cliffs rise like skeletal guardians on either side of the Rio Grande. The water, narrow, slow-moving, and deceptively calm, cuts through the desert with the weight of forgotten time. It was once a lifeline for indigenous tribes, Spanish explorers, and later settlers seeking fortune or freedom along its banks. But within this stretch of arid wilderness, there are whispered accounts, sparse but consistent, of a bridge that appears where none should be. Not a modern structure, not made of steel or rebar, but an old wooden bridge, weather-worn and splintered by age, reportedly spanning a dry canyon tributary that feeds into the Rio Grande. Witnesses, few and far between, describe the same eerie details. The bridge is partially collapsed on one end, its planks faded gray, its railings twisted by time. It looks abandoned, forgotten, and yet it shouldn't exist. Because according to maps, surveys, and aerial photography, there is no such bridge. The earliest known reference comes from the mid-1880s, in the form of a traveler's diary unearthed in an estate sale in El Paso. The author, a Mexican-American prospector named Luis Cordero, described losing his way during a sandstorm and stumbling upon a bridge to nowhere, hovering just above a dry arroyo, where no road led in and none led out. When he returned days later with another man, the bridge was gone. Decades later, in 1932, a Park Service ranger patrolling near the Santa Elena Canyon reported seeing what he believed to be a collapsed pedestrian bridge near a bend in the Rio Grande. When a crew returned to investigate, they found no evidence, no beams, no nails, no sign that anything had ever spanned the gap. At first, these stories were dismissed as heat mirages or mistaken landmarks. In the Southwest, the mind plays tricks, especially when isolation, heat exhaustion, or dehydration take their toll. But the reports continued, scattered across generations and spread thin across time, like pieces of a puzzle no one had fully assembled. What could explain such a phenomenon? One theory suggests the bridge may have once existed, perhaps constructed during a forgotten 19th century mining expedition or military campaign, and simply rotted away, its remains swept away by floods or buried beneath sand and silt. But no archival records mention such a crossing in the area. No engineering blueprints, no local memory. Another explanation draws from optical illusions and atmospheric conditions. Could a distant bridge, reflected through the rising heat and haze of the desert, appear where it shouldn't? Possibly. Mirages, or fata morgana, are well-documented phenomena in desert regions, bending light in such a way that objects over the horizon are projected into view. But in this case, the mirage would need to replicate a structure with astonishing detail, and only in a hyper-specific location. More fringe theories speculate that the bridge is something older, something that predates settlers, perhaps indigenous or even pre-Columbian in origin, but such a hypothesis lacks archaeological support. Still, some point to ancient trails used by Puebloan or Mogollon peoples, suggesting there may once have been primitive crossings in use centuries ago, now erased by erosion and time. Could residual memory, cultural or geological, somehow echo into the present? And then there are those who tread further into the realm of the unexplained. Some local stories passed down among Hispanic and Native communities speak of a puente fantasma, a ghost bridge that appears to lost travelers at moments of great need. A symbol, perhaps, or a spirit path meant to guide or warn. In this version of the tale, the bridge doesn't belong to the physical world. It exists just long enough to be seen, but never crossed. The most striking of these accounts came in 1978, when a couple driving an old pickup truck near the Rio Grande claimed their headlights revealed an old wooden bridge at the edge of a dirt track. They stopped, confused, unsure of where they were. When the driver got out and walked closer, the bridge seemed solid, but oddly silent, as if muffled. The couple decided not to cross and turned back. When they returned with park officials the next morning, there was nothing. No bridge, no signs of tire tracks, no indentation in the dry ground where the structure had supposedly stood. Are these just stories? Misremembered landmarks and overactive imaginations? Perhaps, but the consistency of the descriptions, the same type of bridge in the same part of the river basin, raises questions. Could a forgotten piece of history be buried just beneath the surface? Or is this yet another case of the land itself refusing to give up all its secrets? The Rio Grande has always been a border, not just between nations, but between the known and the unknown. A dividing line between what we can explain and what quietly defies explanation. And so the legend persists. The dry wind whispers through the mesquite trees, the water glints in the sun, and the canyon keeps its silence. Somewhere out there, beneath the scorched horizon, travelers still report brief glimpses of that wooden structure. Sometimes alone, sometimes with others. Always where no bridge should be. Does the Vanishing Bridge truly exist? Or is it a mirage of the mind? A trick of light and memory carved into the heart of the Wild West. Even now, the river flows on. And the bridge, if it ever was, remains elusive, waiting perhaps for the right moment, or the right eyes, to be seen again. From the dry echoes of the Vanishing Bridge along the Rio Grande, we turn now to a stranger relic of the Wild West, one that turned up not in a windswept canyon or dusty trail, but beneath the peeling paint and flickering bulbs of an old carnival sideshow. The place was Long Beach, California. The year was 1976. A film crew was preparing to shoot an episode of The $6 Million Man at a seaside amusement park. The setting was meant to be whimsical, colorful, harmless. But tucked away in the corner of a dilapidated funhouse attraction, where mannequins and props had long ceased to frighten, something grim was hidden in plain sight. A prop, they assumed, a dummy, hung awkwardly from a noose in a corner labeled Ghost Town Gallows. One of the crew members, attempting to adjust what he believed was a wax figure, reached for the arm. It broke off, and inside were human bones. Thus began the strange and haunting investigation into a mummified corpse that had no name, no history, at least not at first. But the trail, as dusty and improbable as any legend from the old frontier, would eventually lead back not to California, but deep into the violent, shifting heart of the Wild West, to a man whose life was as murky as his death. A man who may or may not have been an outlaw, a fugitive, or a pawn in something even more unusual. The mummy was removed from the funhouse and turned over to authorities. Forensic examination revealed it was, in fact, the preserved body of a male, likely in his early 40s. The preservation itself was bizarre. The skin had been coated in arsenic-based embalming chemicals, a practice more common in the 19th century than in modern mortuary science. The joints were rigid, the body shriveled but intact, suggesting it had been kept for decades in dry, controlled conditions. Pinned beneath the skin were remnants of clothing from a bygone era. And then there was the bullet. A single .32 caliber slug lodged in the chest. The case made headlines. Who was this man? How had a corpse ended up as a sideshow prop? And how long had he been on display? The answers would only deepen the mystery. Eventually, with the help of forensic experts, historians, and a few aging showmen, the body was identified. His name was Elmer McCurdy. McCurdy had been a failed outlaw, a small-time train robber whose luck ran out in 1911. After a bungled heist in Oklahoma, he had taken refuge in a barn, only to be gunned down in a shootout with local sheriffs. With no one to claim the body, McCurdy was embalmed by the undertaker, who, in an effort to recoup funeral costs, began charging passers-by a nickel to view the bandit who wouldn't give up. So far, it sounds strange, but not unexplainable. But from this point forward, McCurdy's story drifts into something else, something harder to categorize. Because after being viewed by hundreds, the body was eventually claimed by men posing as his relatives, in reality, traveling carnival operators. And from there, Elmer McCurdy's corpse became a macabre piece of American folk art. He was propped up in sideshows, displayed at wax museums, posed in Western-themed exhibits, and, some say, even used in anti-drug demonstrations. But where the story becomes truly mysterious is in the way McCurdy was lost. Somewhere in the mid-20th century, his identity was forgotten. The labels fell away. The displays became cruder, the context more abstract. Eventually, he became just the hanging man in a neglected amusement park, a relic mistaken for rubber and wire rather than flesh and bone. How is it possible that a human body traveled through half a century of public exhibition unnoticed? That, in an era of increasing modernity, this grim passenger was carted from place to place, unrecognized, unburied, and unremembered? And there are other curiosities. Some have suggested McCurdy's body was altered at some point, its condition preserved far longer than embalming would normally allow. Others whisper that the arsenic solution used on his remains wasn't typical, or that the body was occasionally maintained by those who knew more than they let on. There is also the question of intent. Was McCurdy merely exploited, or did someone, somewhere along the way, deliberately erase his identity for reasons still unclear? There are no official records documenting the mummy's passage through every hands-on exhibit, nor are there detailed lists of where he was displayed from the 1930s through the 1960s. Much of the trail is based on memory, hearsay, and anecdote. Eyewitnesses recalling a body in a barrel or a man-shaped figure in the back of a carnival truck. Some claim McCurdy was used in a horror film or served as a grisly joke at county fairs. None of this has been conclusively verified, and perhaps that's what makes the case so haunting. It blurs the line between spectacle and reality, between death and theater, between what we remember and what we choose to forget. When McCurdy was finally identified in 1976, he was laid to rest in Guthrie, Oklahoma, with concrete poured over his coffin to prevent further disturbance. A symbolic gesture, perhaps, or an admission that even in death, Elmer had traveled too far. Yet, even now, the story continues to echo in strange ways. Could there have been others? Other bodies, other identities lost in the vaudeville haze of traveling shows? What else might have been passed off as decoration or novelty, slowly stripped of name and context? And what does it say about the Wild West itself, that its legends can live on, sometimes in literal form, long after the bullets stop flying? We are left, as always, with more questions than answers. Did Elmer McCurdy become famous only in death? Or was his final journey the truest outlaw tale of all? And perhaps more unsettling still, are there other forgotten figures lying hidden in plain sight, waiting to be rediscovered? The Wild West was never just a place. It was a myth, a performance, a story told over and over, until the truth itself was buried in a barrel, mistaken for a prop, and left to dangle in the shadows of a funhouse. From the sun-bleached gallows of outlaw justice to the traveling corpse of Elmer McCurdy, the line between legend and truth in the American West often blurs beyond recognition. But not all mysteries are buried in desert sands or sealed in forgotten barrels. Some lie hidden in the folds of paper, tucked away in old trunks, lost among the dust of faded ink and brittle leather covers. And one such mystery centers on a single, weathered book, the last Earp ledger. It was discovered, or perhaps rediscovered, in a nondescript antique store just outside of Tucson, Arizona, in the summer of 1997. A battered ledger, its leather cover dry and flaking, its brass corners tarnished, and its spine barely holding together. The seller claimed it came from an estate cleanout in Tombstone, but provided no clear provenance. Inside the pages, in faded handwriting that matched known samples of Wyatt Earp's own script, were notes. Cryptic references to bounties, coded entries on suspected outlaws, and odd mentions of events that didn't align with any established timeline. At first glance, it appeared to be a mundane artifact from the late 19th century, a personal account book, perhaps. But something didn't add up. Some entries were dated after Wyatt Earp's documented death in 1929. Others referenced locations he was never known to have visited. Even more curious were the names. Some crossed out, others circled, a few followed by question marks or strange symbols. Mentions of the Silent Riders, Judge's Passage, and something ominously called Black Hollow. Nothing that appears in official Earp biographies. Could it be a forgery, a literary hoax? Or, more unsettling, was this a genuine journal written by Wyatt or someone close to him, chronicling parts of his life purposefully omitted from public record? Wyatt Earp is among the most mythologized figures in American Western lore. Lawman, gambler, occasional outlaw, his reputation has been shaped as much by dime novels and Hollywood films as by hard evidence. He is remembered for the gunfight at the OK Corral, his long friendship with Doc Holliday, and his later years drifting through mining camps and California towns. But large portions of his life remain undocumented. Earp was a man of silence as much as of action, and the gaps in his story are wide enough to conceal countless secrets. Some historians who have examined the ledger believe it could be authentic. Handwriting experts who compared the script to verified letters of Earp's found compelling similarities. The ledger's paper, binding and ink also align with materials used in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Yet others are skeptical, noting the lack of a solid chain of custody. Without irrefutable proof, the ledger hovers in that uneasy space between artifact and enigma. What makes the ledger especially fascinating are not just the dates or the names, but the content itself. Among the mundane entries, debt tallies, supply lists, travel notes, are detailed accounts of unsolved murders, bizarre disappearances, and shadowy dealings with figures never mentioned in any law enforcement records of the time. One entry describes a place called Echo Canyon, where Wyatt claims a group of men were watching the stars move wrong. Another passage refers to iron monsters below the Mesa, and a meeting at sundown with a man identified only by an initial, J. Were these notes metaphorical, hallucinations, or were they the cryptic language of a man who had seen and done things we've never fully understood? Then there's the reference that perhaps raises the most eyebrows. A page dated 1924, with the chilling note, "He rides again." I saw him clear, black hat, yellow dust. The entry is unsigned, though it appears to have been written in the same hand. Could Wyatt have believed he was being followed? Or was this the work of another writer, someone who added to the ledger after Earp's time? A theory, quietly whispered in Western enthusiast circles, is that the ledger wasn't just Earp's alone, but part of a larger collection of vigilante records, passed down or shared between like-minded lawmen who operated outside traditional justice. They call it the Ledger Trail, a network of hidden documents chronicling the unrecorded history of justice, revenge, and silent alliances throughout the West. If true, the Tombstone ledger would only be one piece in a much larger puzzle. Of course, no official archive has ever confirmed such a theory, and no other ledgers have surfaced, at least not publicly. But private collectors remain tight-lipped, and the world of Western relics is notoriously secretive. Could the last Earp ledger represent a hidden chapter of the American frontier, a record of truths too dangerous or too unbelievable to be shared in Wyatt's lifetime? Or is it simply a clever forgery, meant to stir interest, controversy, and the inevitable bidding war at an estate auction? The ledger now resides in a secure private collection, inaccessible to most researchers. Its contents have never been published in full. Only partial scans and descriptions have leaked, feeding speculation without resolution. And so, the mystery remains. What was Wyatt Earp trying to document, if indeed he was the author at all? What secrets were never meant for history books? What names were too dangerous to speak aloud? And perhaps most compelling, how many other ledgers lie waiting in forgotten trunks, abandoned cabins, or buried in the vaults of collectors, holding keys to stories we've never been allowed to hear? Sometimes, in the West, the loudest truth is the one written in silence, and as the pages of the last Earp ledger quietly age in their locked case, we are left with a single, haunting question. What did Wyatt take to the grave, and what did he leave behind for those brave enough to look?